Hello everyone, I am Mano Scaling, and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, please like the video and subscribe to the channel, and also tell me where you are from and what time you are watching. Now get comfortable and relax. My name is Caleb Morgan, and I was 32 years old when this happened in October 2021. I've replayed these events in my head so many times that they almost feel like the memory of someone else's life. Yet every detail remains seared into my mind with paralyzing clarity. I went into the mountains seeking solitude and ended up wishing I had never set foot on that trail. I'm no survival expert. I'm just a freelance graphic designer who got fed up with city noise. I used to find peace in remote places. In the hush of thick forests, the smell of pine on the wind, the hush of a small campfire crackling by my side. Once or twice a year, I would flee for a time, bringing only my German Shepherd, tank, and the bare minimum of camping supplies. We'd set out for a location that was rugged, remote, and guaranteed to have no Wi-Fi. This time, that spot was the Caney Creek Wilderness in the heart of the Ouachita Mountains of Arkansas. I had researched the area online. It seemed perfect. Dense pine forests, winding creeks, rocky trails that meandered across ridges and valleys. In pictures, it looked breathtaking, mysterious, ancient. People said you could go for days without seeing another soul. That was exactly what I wanted, to shut out the world for a week and get my head on straight. I told no one except my older brother, Jeff, who lived a few states away. He was the only family I was still in contact with at the time. My parents had passed away, one after the other, leaving me with little left to cling to. I hoped that this trip would allow me to sketch, photograph landscapes, maybe cook a fish over the campfire if I felt up to the challenge of fishing. More than anything, I needed the quiet. That was what I'd said to Jeff on the phone before I left. I just need the quiet. He warned me to be safe, to watch for wild animals, to carry pepper spray and maybe a gun. I refused the gun idea. I'd never liked the feel of it in my hand, and I thought tank was protection enough. If push came to shove, tank was strong, obedient, and always ready to defend me. More than that, he was my best friend. Especially since I'd become such a hermit after my breakup with Jess. We'd dated for a little over 2 years. She couldn't handle the way I withdrew from the world, the creeping paranoia I carried with me. She also couldn't stand how deeply I needed these solitary trips. She wanted a partner who'd stay close at night, not vanish into the wild. In mid-October, I packed my Jeep with a tent, sleeping bag, a week's worth of freeze-dried meals, some trail mix, a large water filter, my camera, and a small first aid kit. I topped it off with a paper topographic map of the wilderness area, a good compass, and my phone's GPS. I didn't have illusions that I'd get cell service, but I could at least rely on the phone's offline navigation. I thought I was prepared. I had no clue what was waiting out there in the pine-scented darkness. I arrived at a dusty parking lot on the edge of Caney Creek Wilderness late in the afternoon, the sun hanging low over the tall pines. Gravel crunched under my boots as I got out, and I felt that immediate sense of relief that always came when I left civilization behind. The wind hissed in the treetops. Tank whined softly with excitement, and I had to smile. This, I thought, was exactly what I needed. No horns blaring, no phone calls, just the hush of nature. I started down a trail that was little more than a footpath winding between pines. The smell was heavenly. Fresh resin, damp leaves, cool mountain air. Tank trotted at my side, panting, ears high, tail wagging. Within an hour, I'd left the last sign of a parking lot or roadway far behind. The pines grew thicker, and I watched the GPS on my phone carefully, noting that the "You Are Here" dot was crawling along the marked trail as expected. I planned to set up camp near a creek about 3 miles in. A problem arose around 30 minutes later. My phone's battery plummeted from 80% to 10% in the span of 10 minutes, then died altogether. I cursed under my breath. Maybe I'd left some app open that drained it. It felt like a minor annoyance. After all, I still had my paper map and compass. There was just something disquieting about it happening so abruptly. Still, it wasn't enough to make me turn back. I pressed on until sundown. I found a beautiful spot beside a narrow creek surrounded by towering pines. The water was crystal clear. I set up my tent, unrolled my sleeping bag, and gathered stones into a circle for a safe fire pit. The only thing that dulled my excitement was the odd rustling in the undergrowth, coming and going so quickly that Tank's ears never stopped twitching. I told myself it was just squirrels or maybe a fox. Yet, that rustling seemed far heavier than a squirrel could manage. I worked faster, trying to forget about it. As night descended, the forest fell eerily quiet. I managed to get a fire going, though it behaved oddly. The flames kept sputtering, hissing as if the logs were soaked. Only they weren't. They were dry enough to snap in half. Once lit, the fire flickered with hints of green and blue. At first, I assumed it might be some mineral in the wood. Over the years, I'd seen unusual colors in campfires before, but it never stabilized. Never glowed the comforting orange I knew. Tank noticed it too, staring at the unnatural flames with his hackles raised. I patted him, trying to calm us both. I'd left my phone in the tent, so I couldn't film it. Without any real technology on hand, it was just me, the dog, and the flickering flames in the middle of the absolute dark. Eventually, I forced myself to sleep. I'd chosen a brand new sleeping bag for this trip, an insulated one designed for chilly nights. I remember zipping myself up to my chin. Tank curled up at my feet. He liked to sleep just within the tent flap, so if anything ever tried to break in, he'd be the first line of defense. I shut my eyes to the whisper of the creek outside. When I woke, it was dawn. Soft beams of sunshine filtered through the pines and the fire was long dead. But something else was wrong. The first thing I noticed was that my sleeping bag was open, unzipped from the inside. There was a chill on my arms as I rose to a half-sitting position. It was as though I'd invited the cold in. The second thing I noticed was that Tank was outside the tent, whimpering softly at the entrance flap, as if he didn't want to come inside. That was strange. He'd never done that before. I asked him what was wrong in a gentle tone, but he just stared. Finally, I scooted forward, unzipping the tent door. Tank crawled in, tail tucked. He looked nervous, ears pinned back. He pressed against my chest, trembling a little. I realized I was trembling too, and I didn't even know why. I felt the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I remember saying out loud, half to myself, "We're fine, buddy. Just animals outside in the night, that's all." I went out to check the site. Embers from the fire were stone cold, and footprints, human footprints, were all around the perimeter of my campsite. It looked as if someone had walked in wide circles around my tent at some point in the night. The prints were impossible to read clearly on the pine needles, but I could see enough to know they weren't mine. I checked to see if I'd walked around in my sleep, but my boots were still in the tent, laces neatly tied. Whoever made those footprints, it wasn't me. The next thing I saw was a small chunk of my freeze-dried rations strewn on the ground a few yards away. I picked it up, discovered it was moldy and soggy. My entire bag of food was half spilled on the ground. Everything was coated in a greenish fuzz that reeked like rotting cheese. I nearly gagged. It made no sense. Everything had been sealed, vacuum-packed. It was brand new. How does freeze-dried food rot overnight? I fought a rising sense of panic. I was about 3 miles from the Jeep, less than half a day's journey back. I had a water filter and still had some granola that appeared untouched, so I wasn't going to starve. But the footprints, the rotted supplies, my heart hammered. Was it a prank? Maybe some deranged local messing with an out-of-state camper. But my license plate was Arkansas too, granted, from a city an hour away. Why do this, though? I resisted the impulse to pack up and flee. I'd only spent one night. I had come here to challenge myself, to find solitude and reset. I checked the map carefully, decided to head deeper into the forest. My plan was to reach the next ridge, a place near Black Fork Creek, which the rangers had told me offered excellent views. I'd try to keep my eyes open for any other hikers or suspicious characters. Maybe I'd be safer off the more popular trail. I cleaned up the rotted food as best I could and buried it far from camp, not wanting to attract animals. Then I set off along the faint path that snaked deeper into the trees. Tank followed close, sometimes whimpering. I'd never seen him so skittish. The morning air felt stale, as if the wind refused to blow. That was the moment I checked my watch, only to realize it was 2 hours behind what my phone had shown the previous day. I chalked it up to the watch battery dying, but it kept ticking along. The hands were moving, but they indicated a time that was nonsensical compared to the daylight I was seeing. In the hours to follow, I noticed it would skip and jump, mostly backward, sometimes forward, as if stuck in its own loop. It became so unreliable that I stuffed it in my pocket and tried to ignore it. I walked, checking the map frequently. Then I noticed something else. The terrain didn't match the topographic lines. According to the map, I should be gradually climbing an eastern slope. But the slope I was on seemed to be heading downhill, and the creek I expected to cross was nowhere to be found. I told myself I must have made a wrong turn, so I backtracked, scanning for the trail. The problem was, there didn't seem to be more than one path. It was just one narrow corridor through the pines, and no matter how far I went, I couldn't find that original creek. It was as if the path itself was messing with me. Some sections looked identical, down to a fallen log or a mossy boulder. At first, I thought I was losing it. Then, after hours, I found myself stepping right back into my old campsite. The same circle of rocks, the half-burned logs, the same footprints trodden in the pine needles. Except I hadn't looped intentionally. I'd been trying to go in a straight line in the opposite direction. I cursed loudly, the sound of my own voice making me shudder. Tank stood next to me, panting with a wild fear in his eyes. I rubbed the back of my neck, feeling sweat gather despite the cool air. None of this made sense. I decided to aim for higher ground, climb a ridge, look for any sign of a road, a cell tower, a vantage point. A few miles to the north, there was said to be a forest road, though I remembered the map had indicated it was seldom used and mostly unpaved. Setting my compass to north, I started off again. But the needle swung in lazy circles, making it impossible to gauge a true heading. I ended up relying on the sun's position and pressed forward. Every step felt heavier, as though the forest itself weighed on me. The pines closed in, their trunks so close together I had to squeeze through in places. The hours dragged on, and Tank whined constantly. Once or twice I heard a faint sobbing sound, like a woman crying softly behind the trees. When I spun around, there was nothing. No sign of another human. Darkness came early that day, and I was forced to make camp once more. I felt a swirl of emotions: fear, anger, confusion. I told myself I'd just pitch the tent, make a fire, and get through another night. In the morning, I'd figure out the direction and get out of these cursed woods. I was done with my quiet retreat. There was no peace here. I rummaged through my pack for tinder. A wave of dread washed over me when I saw that half my gear was gone, including my best flashlight and spare batteries. The bottom of the pack was unzipped, though it had been closed earlier. My bag of granola was also missing. My only real provisions left were water purification tablets, a protein bar in my jacket pocket, and some chewing gum. Furious, I searched all around my immediate area but found nothing. Tank paced with me, sniffing at the ground. It was as though someone or something had stolen my things. Either that, or I'd dropped them in my wandering. But how? When I lit the campfire that night, it sputtered again, giving off sickly green and blue flames. The crackling was wrong, almost like static. I was so hungry I barely noticed at first. But at some point, my head started to droop, and my eyelids felt heavy. Tank was dozing too, and I caught him drifting off just a few feet from the flickering light. I was exhausted, physically and mentally. I'd wandered uphill and down, discovered no sign of an exit. My phone was a useless brick. My watch was nonsense. My map didn't match the real landscape. Everything felt unreal. I drifted off to a half-sleep, leaning against a log. A dream came. I saw Jess walking through the pines, her long hair shining in the moonlight, calling my name softly. But she wasn't looking at me. Her eyes seemed vacant, and the longer I looked, the more the vision twisted. Her hair grew thin and knotted, her face gaunt, her lips pulled back in a silent scream. I startled awake, heart pounding. The fire was nearly out. Suddenly, a shrill scream ripped through the silent forest. It was a sound like nails on glass, stretching across the darkness. Tank woke with a start, barking wildly, and I nearly crawled into the remains of the fire from shock. The scream came again, more piercing, echoing off the trees. It was the most unnatural wail I'd ever heard. Part agony, part rage, distinctly female. My mind conjured up the image of the same figure from my dream, hair like rotted seaweed, mouth unhinged far too wide. I was afraid if I called out, whoever or whatever was screaming would respond. So I stayed silent, scooting closer to Tank. The forest felt strangely charged, as if the very air was vibrating. After a minute, the scream stopped. The sudden quiet was almost worse. I heard no rustling, no footsteps, no animals. Tank's fur was standing on end, and he growled continuously, a low rumble of warning. I slept only in short, uneasy bursts. At some point, I thought I heard footsteps in the leaves, as though someone was walking around the outer edge of my camp. But whenever I looked, there was nothing. The next morning arrived with colorless light filtering through the trees. I was so drained, so full of dread, that it took me some time to realize Tank was gone. My dog, my companion, my protector, vanished. The tent was half-zipped, but there was no sign of a struggle. Panic flared in my chest. I called for him, a shout that reverberated among the tall pines with no answer, only my own echo. For a moment, I thought maybe he'd wandered off to relieve himself. But an hour passed, and I saw not a single paw print leading away. The thick layer of pine needles made it impossible to track him. I circled the camp, calling his name so many times my voice cracked. Eventually, I slumped to the ground, exhausted and on the verge of tears. My one companion gone. I convinced myself that I had to keep moving. Maybe Tank had chased after something and gotten lost. If I kept traveling in a straight line, I might find him, or at least find the road. Every few minutes I'd call his name, my voice hollow. My hope dwindled with every unanswered shout. Around midday, I was pushing through a stand of pines so thick that they nearly formed a wall. And just beyond them, I stumbled upon a grisly sight. A man's body, mutilated, strung up on a low-slung branch about 8 feet above the ground. My stomach flipped. He was in hiking gear, cargo pants, boots, a tattered coat. He'd been ripped open from his chest to his belly. His intestines were partially hanging out, and his face was concealed by a piece of paper pinned in place by a sharpened stick. I recognized the paper as a corner of a topographic map. A single word was scrawled across it, but I couldn't read it immediately through the gore. I staggered back, covering my mouth. The iron stench of blood filled my nostrils, making me gag. My eyes watered, but I forced myself to look again. This was a human being, obviously a fellow hiker. Someone had done this to him. This wasn't an animal attack. The branches overhead were smeared with dark splatters. I realized with horror that the man's arms were tied to the branch with rope-like vines. His head slumped forward. Slowly, I reached out, shaking with terror, and peeled the map away from what remained of his face. Underneath was a mask of gore, eyes wide, mouth agape, as though in permanent shock. The pinned piece of map was from the same region of Caney Creek I was in, but it was blackened in places. Beneath the smears, I could read this single, scrawled word: mine. That's when I spotted paw prints in the dirt near the trunk of the tree. Large ones, as big as tanks, but they were spaced oddly, as if the dog that made them had walked upright for part of the distance. My breath caught. I quickly convinced myself it couldn't be Tank. Maybe it was a wolf, or coyote, or even something bigger. There are black bears in Arkansas, but these prints weren't from a bear. They looked so much like Tank's tracks that my mind reeled. I turned and retched, losing whatever was left in my stomach. Fear hammered at my temples. There was some monstrous presence in these woods, and it had stolen my dog. Or worse, it had somehow changed him. I flashed to the memory of the footsteps around my tent, the rotted food, the bizarre scream in the night, the woman's crying. This was no normal place. I was dealing with something I didn't understand. Desperate to keep my sanity, I pressed on. My nerves were raw. I occasionally stumbled, mind racing through every possibility. The creeping sense of being watched never left me. The pines rustled overhead, but no breeze touched my sweat-slicked face. Several times I felt sure I saw a figure standing among the trunks, but whenever I focused, there was only emptiness. Mid-afternoon, I found a small trickle of a stream. I knelt to fill my water bottle. Thankful I at least had purification tablets. I just dropped one in when I heard a rustle behind me. I swung around, heart in my throat. Then I saw him. Tank. My dog stood in the shadows silent. Relief flooded me, and I scrambled to my feet calling his name. But as he stepped into the patchy sunlight, I realized something was wrong. His eyes were clouded, an eerie whitish gray, the pupils barely visible. His stance was stiff, unnatural. I called out, "Tank, come!" And for a moment, he didn't budge, just stared at me. Then he slowly padded forward, tail wagging in a strange robotic way, too slow, too mechanical. His mouth hung open in a bizarre imitation of a grin. A chill shot through my body. Dogs don't smile. Not like that. I reached out to him, careful, and my hand touched the fur on his neck. It was damp. I pulled away, staring down at my fingers in horror. They were slick with blood. For a moment, I couldn't speak. Tank let out a low sound, almost like a chuckle, and in the hush of the forest, it sounded too human. My heart pounded so hard it felt like my ribs might crack. I saw a dark crust of blood around his jaws. My mind went to the mutilated hiker. I tried to choke out words, to comfort him or to comfort myself. "What happened, boy? Are you hurt?" He tilted his head, eyes rolling back slightly. Then he barked, a short, sharp sound that echoed strangely. Next, I heard another voice, a woman's voice. It spoke from Tank's mouth. "Stay, she likes you," I screamed, stumbling away. My dog sat down, gazing at me with that same unnatural grin. My mind reeled with impossibility. Dogs don't speak. Certainly not in the voice of a woman. My body trembled with raw terror. I croaked, "Who are you?" Then a wave of dizziness overwhelmed me. In that moment, I swear I saw the forest shift around me, the pine trunks blurring, the sun flickering like a dying light bulb. A voice echoed in my mind, Jess's voice. She said, "Caleb, you always do this. You always run. Don't leave me again." Darkness threatened to close in, but I forced myself to stay conscious. Stumbling backward until my heel caught on a root, I fell hard, the breath knocked out of me. Tank took a few slow steps toward me, head cocked, the blood on his muzzle almost black under the pale light. He sniffed the air, that spine-tingling grin still twisting his mouth. Then he barked again, and a faint rasping that sounded like laughter came out. I did the only thing I could think to do. I ran. I scrambled to my feet and ran, not caring about direction, ignoring the branches that scratched my arms and face. I heard Tank following, his footfalls unhurried. The forest seemed to bend in impossible ways, funneling me back into the same pockets of thick pines or dead-end gullies. More than once, I found myself face to face with the same fallen log or the same sunken clearing. It was as if the wilderness had turned into a labyrinth. I don't know how long I ran, but eventually my legs gave out. I dropped to the ground, panting, tears burning my eyes. I scanned the area. Tank was nowhere in sight. Silence enveloped me. My watch said 11:53 a.m., but the sky was turning orange. The watch hand spun backward in a slow circle. No sense of time existed anymore. I was lost in a forest that refused to behave like a normal place, with my dog possessed or replaced by something I couldn't comprehend. I started to notice a smell, the faint reek of decay swirling on the wind. The hair on my arms stood up. I pressed myself against the trunk of a pine, scanning the area, expecting to see the mutilated body from before, or something just as horrific. Instead, I glimpsed a pale figure flitting between the trees. She had hair like dirty cobwebs trailing behind her. Her limbs were unnaturally long. A sense of dread took root in my gut. This had to be the source of that scream. There was something deeply, viscerally wrong about her very presence. I tried to stay perfectly still, even though my lungs were on fire and sweat poured down my face. The figure glided closer. She wore what looked like a stained white gown that clung to her unnaturally thin body. Black veins snaked up her forearms and neck, pulsing with what looked like tar. She paused as if sniffing the air, then tilted her head back and let out a wail, the same impossible scream I'd heard the night before. It pierced my eardrums and I gasped in pain. My vision swam. The figure turned her head, and though her face was half hidden by a veil of tangled hair, I glimpsed hollow eyes. My heart hammered, as if it wanted to break free of my chest. She took a step closer, her movement predatory. A voice in my head screamed to run, but I couldn't. I was frozen, pinned by sheer terror. This was Mora, I would later realize. The Banshee of Black Fork Ridge, an ancient spirit or demon rumored in local lore. Or maybe just a monstrous entity that took on the shape of a woman. I'd read scattered references online about strange wailing in the Ouachitas, but I'd laughed it off as tall tales. Yet, here she was, in the flesh, or whatever twisted version of flesh she occupied. The air around her shimmered, as if the boundaries of reality struggled to contain her presence. The moment she opened her mouth again, I instinctively clapped my hands over my ears. The sound was excruciating, like needles jammed into my skull. I fought the urge to black out and forced myself to scramble to my feet. By some miracle, I found the strength to run, ignoring branches that clawed at me. I knew I was in a cat-and-mouse game that I couldn't possibly win. As I ran, I fumbled for anything in my pack that could defend me. My fingers found a lighter. Not exactly a weapon, but then my mind began racing. Fire! Spirits hate fire. or maybe that was just a cliché. Still, it was the only plan I had. If I could build a big enough flame, maybe I could keep her at bay, or at least see her coming. The next hours, or perhaps minutes, blurred. My sense of time had shattered. My watch read nonsense. The sun never seemed to move in the sky the way it should. Sometimes it felt like dusk, sometimes dawn. I started hearing Jess's voice more frequently, calling my name from behind the trees. Once, I stopped to call back, a shred of hope flaring in my chest. But then I remembered the horror that had spoken with her voice. There was no way Jess was here. She was hundreds of miles away, living her own life. At some point, I came across another clearing. A battered sign read, "Black Fork Trail," with an arrow pointing south. Relief sparked in me. This was a known route. I remembered reading about it on the official website for the Ouachita National Forest. If I followed it south long enough, I might reach the main road. Clinging to that fragment of hope, I pressed on, ignoring the staggering pain in my legs, the dryness in my throat. Then the terrain ended in a ravine, an almost sheer drop. I saw swirling mist below, and though I could have tried to climb down, it looked too dangerous. Jagged rocks, slick moss. A fall might be fatal. I realized with a sinking feeling that the arrow on the sign might have been pointing to a trail that no longer existed, or had never existed in reality. I was trapped again. That was when I heard a low growl behind me. I spun to see Tank standing in the middle of the clearing, his fur matted with dried blood, those ghostly eyes fixed on me. He advanced, step by step, as if herding me away from the ravine's edge. My eyes darted around for any path of escape, but there was nothing but thick walls of pine except for the precarious drop behind me. My dog's mouth opened, and Jess's voice came out again, though distorted by the canine throat. "Don't fall, Caleb. You'll spoil the fun." I let out a trembling sob. "Please, I don't know what you are, but let him go." The dog only cocked its head. For a moment, something like pity flickered across its face. Then that chilling grin returned. A new scream tore through the forest. Mora's shriek vibrated the very air, and I jerked my gaze upward in time to see a flash of white near the tree line. She was closing in. Something primal took over in me. I decided I'd rather die fighting than let her toy with me. My eyes landed on a fallen branch, charred at one end, maybe from a wildfire years ago. I lunged, snatched the branch, and flicked my lighter, coaxing a tiny flame to life. The bark hissed. Tank snarled, ears flattened, and for a moment I saw confusion in his ghostly gaze. I realized I needed more than just a flicker. Without thinking, I bit the inside of my cheek and spat blood onto the branch, half remembering some superstition about blood offerings and old rituals. I don't know why I did it. Desperation makes us do strange things. The flame sputtered, then caught, creeping along the dry bark. It glowed with an intensity that surprised me. Tank growled again, stepping forward, but I swung the burning stick and he staggered back, whining. In that moment, Mora appeared at the edge of the clearing, her features barely visible behind the hanging veil of her hair. The black veins that webbed her arms pulsed, as if alive with their own energy. She let out another keening shriek, staggering backward from the flame. My heart pounded with adrenaline, and I realized I might have a chance. She stumbled, thrashing as the light from the branch seemed to burn her skin. The air around her rippled, as though time itself twisted in agony at her presence. I took a trembling step forward. "Get away from me," I hissed, brandishing the burning stick like a sword. She howled, that nightmarish sound echoing, and fell to her knees, spidery fingers clutching at her face. At the same time, Tank lunged at me, fangs bared. He didn't move like he normally did. This was a savage lunge, all snapping jaws and rage. I swung the stick blindly, and the flame caught on Tank's fur. He yelped, stumbling aside, muzzle smoking. A wave of guilt hit me, but the terror overshadowed everything. I had to survive. I didn't have time for pity. Mara was still screaming, but I saw an opening as she staggered. Summoning what little courage I had left, I ran toward her and stabbed the tip of the burning branch right into her side. The wood sunk into something soft, and a burst of black fluid oozed out, sizzling against the flame. Her scream rose to a deafening crescendo, and the entire world seemed to stutter. The sky flickered, the pine trees blurred. It was as if someone had pressed pause, then fast forward, then rewind, all in the span of seconds. I almost lost my footing, my vision swimming with nauseating jumps in color and light. Tank attacked me from behind, sinking teeth into my shoulder. Pain exploded down my arm and I fell forward, the breath knocked out of me. My grip on the branch loosened. I felt his jaws tighten, heard the growl vibrating in his throat. Summoning adrenaline-fueled strength, I twisted, managing to bring my knee up and strike him in the chest. He yelped, releasing my shoulder, and we both tumbled on the ground. Up close, I saw the cloudy whiteness in his eyes swirl with threads of black, and Jess's voice hissed from deep within his throat. "I told you not to run." I found my hunting knife, more of a utility blade really, strapped to my belt. With shaking hands, I yanked it free. Tank lunged again, jaws snapping mere inches from my face. I drove the knife into his side, tears streaming down my cheeks. The dog convulsed, letting out a pained whine. He fought me, thrashing, jaws still searching for my throat. I twisted the blade until I felt a horrifying shudder pass through his body. For a split second, Tank's eyes cleared. He stared at me, and I saw the dog I loved dying in confusion. Then his eyes slid closed. Blood seeped across his fur. My heart shattered, but I didn't have time to grieve. Mara was thrashing only feet away. The light from the burning branch flickered, threatening to go out. I scrambled to grab it, ignoring the agony in my shoulder. The banshee rose to her feet, black fluid spilling from her side, her eyes fierce with inhuman rage. She opened her mouth and I prepared for another scream, but it came out as a wet choke. She glared at me, hatred radiating from her gaunt features. Her entire body trembled, and for an instant it looked like she might lunge, but the flame seemed to hold her at bay. She hissed, and the tar-like substance in her veins pulsed again, as if trying to repair the damage. I managed to stagger upright, brandishing the sputtering fire. As I waved it in her direction, she skittered backward, dissolving into the dense tree line. Her ragged breathing echoed, then faded into the forest. Silence returned, broken only by my own gasps. I collapsed beside Tank's limp body, tears mixing with the blood on my face. I don't know how long I stayed there, cradling him, my best friend, the being that had protected me for so many years. Even though he'd just tried to kill me under that vile influence, I knew it wasn't really him. Something had twisted him, used him. My heart ached with guilt and sorrow. I'd never forgive myself. Eventually, the survival instinct kicked in. If I stayed here, I'd be a sitting duck when Mara returned. I had no illusions that I'd truly killed her. She was something beyond normal life or death. I gathered my water bottle, the remains of the lighter, and my battered backpack. As gently as I could, I removed Tank's collar, tears blurring my vision. I wanted to bury him, but the earth was too rocky and time too short. I settled for covering him with branches and pine needles, whispering a broken apology. Stumbling away from that spot, I forced myself to keep moving. If there was any chance of survival, it lay in finding the road or any sign of civilization. I walked in a daze, teeth chattering from shock. Blood seeped from my shoulder wound, and I used a strip of cloth from my shirt to stanch it. Each step felt heavier than the last. The sun overhead seemed stuck at the same angle. My watch read some random time, 2:17 a.m., but from the sky, it looked like late afternoon. My entire sense of reality had been shredded by the events of the last day, or days, who could tell? At intervals, I swore I saw Jess among the pines, her figure flickering, beckoning me. I ignored her, half hallucinating, half expecting her to vanish. Or worse, to speak in that guttural voice from Tank's mouth. I marched on until I collapsed. Then I forced myself to get up and march again. Sometime near dusk, if it truly was dusk, I smelled wood smoke in the distance. I followed that faint smell, heart hammering with desperate hope. Gradually, I heard voices. Real voices. Human. I nearly tripped over a ridge and came crashing down into a small clearing where two men in camouflage were kneeling over a campfire. They jumped up, startled, rifles in hand. "Whoa there, buddy!" one shouted, alarmed. The other pointed a flashlight at me, illuminating my torn, blood-stained clothes, the rag tied around my wounded shoulder, my wide, delirious eyes. I raised my arms, trembling. "Please, help! I got lost." They exchanged glances. One lowered his rifle slowly. "Jesus, you look half dead. Sit down, let me grab the kit." He rummaged through a large camouflage pack, pulling out a first aid box. I sank to my knees, unable to speak for a moment. The men, who introduced themselves as Bill and Carter, cleaned my wound with antiseptic, wincing at the teeth marks. Carter shook his head, shining a flashlight into my eyes. Did a dog do this? Or some kind of animal? I swallowed hard. My dog. He wasn't himself. My voice cracked. There's something out there in the woods. A woman. She screams. I trailed off, realizing how insane I sounded. They both went pale. Bill muttered something about hearing weird noises. Carter glanced at him uneasily, then returned his attention to me. "We'll get you out of here. There's an old logging road about a mile that way," he said, jerking his thumb over his shoulder. "We got an ATV parked there. You'll be all right." That mile felt like an eternity. My body wanted to collapse every few steps. The men kept shining their flashlights around warily, as if expecting something to leap from the trees. I stayed alert, convinced Mora would appear or that I'd hear Tank's possessed bark once more. But all we heard were distant owls, the crunch of our boots, and the nervous breathing of three men who wanted to see daylight again. At last, we reached the ATV. Bill drove while Carter helped me stay upright, pressing a cloth against my shoulder to control the bleeding. The engine rumbled to life, and the taste of exhaust was almost comforting. A taste of civilization. We bounced along a rutted dirt path for what felt like an hour, the headlights cutting through the dark. Finally, a rough gravel road appeared, and Bill navigated onto it with obvious relief. A battered pickup truck was parked there. Carter helped me into the passenger seat while Bill attached the ATV to a hitch. I think I passed out briefly. When I came to, we were driving along a lonely highway under a cold moon, heading toward the nearest town. I half expected the road to vanish or to warp like the forest, but it stayed solid beneath the tires. They took me to a small clinic in a place called Mena, a quiet town near the southwestern edge of the Ouachitas. By the time we arrived, I was shivering, drifting in and out of lucidity. Doctors patched me up, gave me painkillers, and asked me countless questions. I tried to explain what had happened, but it all sounded too impossible. At one point, a nurse calmly said, "Honey, you've been missing for 3 weeks. Your brother reported you gone, and the rangers went looking but never found you." 3 weeks? I could have sworn I'd only been in the forest for 5 or 6 days at most. My mind reeled. Had I lost time, or had the forest stolen it from me? A local sheriff came by to get a statement. I told him about the dead hiker pinned to a branch. He said no body matching that description had been found. He said that area was closed off a year ago after reports of a murder. I described the location, though in truth I could barely remember it with any clarity. All I knew was that I'd seen a man strung up and eviscerated. The sheriff said they'd send a search party. I never heard the outcome. I ended up staying in that clinic for a few days. A few times I woke to find the staff standing over me, concern etched into their faces. They probably thought I was insane. Maybe I am. I kept dreaming about the forest, about Tank. In those dreams, he'd stare at me with that horrifying grin, waiting. Or I'd see Jess crying in the distance, unreachable. I'd jolt awake, drenched in sweat, my shoulder throbbing in agony. When they finally cleared me to leave, I found a note from Bill and Carter wishing me well. They apologized for not sticking around, but they had families to get back to. Fair enough. My brother Jeff arrived soon after, driving all the way down from Missouri to pick me up. He was frantic with worry, hugging me so tightly my stitches threatened to break. I tried to explain what had happened, but he mostly chalked it up to exposure, dehydration, hallucinations. I wished it were just that. In the weeks that followed, I tried to piece my life back together. I holed up in my apartment, refusing to answer the phone. Jess emailed me once, having heard from mutual friends that something terrible happened. I didn't know how to respond. I stared at her message for hours, remembering how real it had felt to hear her voice coming from Tank's mouth. In the end, I simply deleted it, half convinced none of this was real. The nightmares didn't stop. Each night I'd dream of that banshee, her black veins pulsing, or I'd see the dead hiker with the map pinned to his face. I'd wake up soaked in sweat, my hands gripping the empty air where Tank should have been. One morning, I stumbled to the bathroom and caught a glimpse of myself in the mirror. My cheeks were sunken, dark circles under my eyes. My hair had started to gray at the temples. I couldn't have aged that much in a matter of weeks, could I? Then there was the final punch in the gut. I found Tank's collar on my bedside table, though I distinctly remembered leaving it in my pack. My pack was still in the clinic's lost and found, or so they said, so how did the collar get here? My hand shook as I picked it up. The name tag jingled softly. Tank. The metal felt ice cold against my skin, and for an instant I imagined I heard that guttural voice whispering, "Stay, she likes you." The next day, I realized my watch was missing from my belongings at the clinic. That same evening, I found it lying next to Tank's collar, both set neatly on my pillow as if placed by an unseen hand. The watch's hands were ticking backward. No matter how many times I reset it, they resumed their backward journey as soon as I let go. It became so unnerving that I stuffed it in a drawer. But sometimes, late at night, I'd hear it ticking from across the room, whispering that time itself had fractured in those woods. I want to say that's where my story ends, but it never truly ended. You can't just walk away from an encounter like that. My sense of reality was shaken too deeply. No official report ever confirmed what happened in those woods. The search for the mutilated hiker turned up nothing. The locals around Mina whispered about a legendary wailing spirit in the mountains, but no one gave me direct answers. Maybe they were afraid. Maybe they simply didn't believe me. As for me, I survived, but I left a part of myself behind in that wilderness. Sometimes, when I walk my neighborhood at night, I catch a glimpse of a shadow with 4 legs and a wagging tail just out of the corner of my eye. Or I hear my name whispered in Jess's voice on the wind. I snap around to look, but There's never anyone there. Rationally, I know it can't be real, but there's a knot of dread deep in my gut that says it is. If you ever drive near Caney Creek Wilderness, be careful. People go missing there more often than you'd think, though most are eventually found. And if you hike those trails, watch out for low-hanging branches or footprints circling your camp in the night. If you see a pale figure with black veins lurking between the pines, run. If you hear that long, ghastly scream, cover your ears and pray. Because once Mora sets her sights on you, reality itself starts to unravel. And if a beloved friend or animal goes missing, only to return with vacant eyes and an unholy grin, don't hesitate. The moment you do, it might be the last moment that belongs to you at all. I still don't know why I made it out of those woods alive. Part of me thinks I never did, that I'm caught in some final loop of hope while my body rots among the pines. Another part of me wonders if Mora let me go, if the flame and the taste of my own blood forced her to retreat, but not vanish. Perhaps she marked me that day, and she can always find me, no matter how many miles I put between us. Whether I'm actually free, or just telling myself this story as my final delusion, I can't say. All I know is what I've seen and heard. And I'm telling you so you'll believe me, or at least keep your guard up if the forest ever beckons to you the way it once beckoned to me. Loneliness can be a powerful lure, but some places, some silences, shouldn't be sought out. Some nights, you can never sleep safe no matter how far you think you've run. That's the truth of what happened to me, Caleb Morgan, 32 years old in October of 2021. I told you my story. Don't make the same mistake. My name is Samantha Carter, Sam for short. I'm 32 years old, and I swear every word I'm about to tell you is true. This happened in September of 2023, deep in the Ouachita National Forest in Arkansas, near a lonely place called Big Fork Ridge. I was there for a nature photography project, although in hindsight I recognize I was also running away from my own life. I went there with my friend Hannah Morales, my German shepherd Luca, and all the hopes that I'd come back with a fresh start. Instead, I came back with nightmares that will never leave me. I need to tell this story straight, so I'll begin by describing why we went camping in one of the more remote corners of the forest. Despite everything at the time, it felt like a good idea. I'm a freelance nature photographer and blogger. I've spent the last 6 years traveling around the country, capturing wildlife and scenic landscapes for magazines and my personal blog. It's not a lucrative lifestyle, but I love it. I'd just gone through a nasty divorce, the kind that leaves you feeling hollow inside, questioning every decision you've ever made. And so I planned this trip with Hannah for solace and maybe a little excitement. Hannah Morales, 30 years old, was someone I trusted, or thought I did. We'd met in college, then drifted in and out of each other's lives, usually reconnecting online to talk about everything from silly cat memes to serious heartbreak. When I posted on social media that I planned to do a multi-day camping trip in the Ouachita Mountains, Hannah messaged me almost immediately. She said she needed to escape as much as I did. I remember how enthusiastic she sounded. She said she'd handle the campsite permits and permission forms if needed, so we'd be free to trek off trail near Big Fork Ridge. The plan was for us to spend the first couple of nights together. Then, if I decided to extend my stay, I'd remain solo with Luca. It was an arrangement that suited me fine. I drove from my place in Little Rock, loaded my SUV with cameras, survival gear, though calling it survival gear might be an overstatement, extra water filters, a tarp, freeze-dried meals, a basic first aid kit, and Luca. My dog was everything to me. A gorgeous German shepherd with that classic black and tan coat, protective but usually gentle. She had been my constant companion through the divorce, never complaining, always at my side. We arrived at the rendezvous point, a dusty parking area near the trailhead, where Hannah was waiting in her beat-up Subaru. She hopped out and greeted Luca with excited scratches behind the ears, then gave me a tight hug. I remember her voice. "Sam, this is going to be amazing." I didn't know it then, but I would soon regret it. We started late in the morning, heading down a designated path for a while until the trail turned rocky and narrow. The higher we went, the more strenuous it became. I was out of breath, but Hannah led the way, forging a path off the main trail when she saw a clearing she liked. We followed a paper map she'd found. She claimed it had more detailed terrain information. On that map, Big Fork Ridge was marked with a giant star as a scenic overlook. I should have realized that the star might have been scribbled in by someone else, but it's easy to ignore red flags in the moment. Early that first afternoon, we found what looked like an old campsite. Stones arranged in a circle formed a makeshift fire pit. Rusted metal stakes jutted out of the ground. I remember Luca whining. Something about that place made my dog skittish. The site was large enough for 2 tents and close to a narrow creek. It seemed perfect. I set down my gear, started to unload. That's when Hannah casually mentioned that the official campsite we had reserved was actually a mile or so away. This was just a better spot, she said, more private and scenic. It would be fine. No one would bother us. "It's pretty remote," I remarked. Then I asked a question I should have asked from the start. "Are you sure we're allowed to camp here?" Hannah tried to deflect with a grin. Would I ever break the rules? She joked, but she never fully answered. She set about unfurling her tent in a hurry, while I tried to shake off my discomfort. I rationalized that we were in the middle of nowhere. Who was going to care? We busied ourselves for a while, setting up the tents, collecting sticks for a fire, and filtering water from the creek. I forgot about my concern in the swirl of activity. I was just happy to be out of the city, away from phone calls from my ex, away from deadlines. There's a freedom in the forest that's hard to capture unless you've felt it. The wind in the pines, the faint scent of wet leaves decaying, reminding you that nature moves at its own steady pace, unaffected by your personal dramas. Later, while clearing debris from the fire pit, I noticed something that turned my stomach, a small, scorched bone. Initially, I thought it belonged to an animal, a raccoon, maybe, but there was something about the shape, something that made me think it was human, maybe a child's. The idea was too disturbing to dwell on. I stuffed it under a rock so Hannah wouldn't see it and freak out. But the discovery stayed with me, lodged in my mind, casting a pall over our cheerful mood. Evening came quickly under the dense canopy of trees. We got a modest fire going. I took out my camera to capture some shots of the ridgeline through the last of the twilight. Hannah told jokes. Luca dozed beside me. Despite the weirdness of the bone, I felt a surge of hope. This trip would be my healing. But from the start, the forest refused to give us any peace. Strange things happened that first night. The fire kept dying. Not just a normal fade from lack of kindling, but abrupt sputters as if an invisible force was snuffing it out. We had to continuously feed it with tinder to keep it alive. Our phones, fully charged, both drained to nothing in under an hour. It made no sense. I remember complaining because I wanted to upload a photo to my blog, only to find my phone was dead. Hannah's phone died too. In a fit of frustration, I turned them both off, thinking I'd recharge them tomorrow with my solar charger. We decided to get some rest. Hannah turned in first. I stayed up for a bit, listening to the wind swirl through the trees. At times, it sounded almost like whispering. Once or twice, I thought I heard a definite voice, but I told myself it was just the wind playing tricks. Luca's ears kept perking up, scanning the darkness. At around midnight, I called it quits and crawled into my tent, Luca curling up near the entrance. When I woke at dawn, the first thing I noticed was the absence of Hannah. The second thing I noticed was that her sleeping bag, still unrolled in her tent, was unzipped from the inside, as if she had quietly left in the night. Fearing the worst, I rushed out, calling her name. No answer. Luca trotted after me, ears up, tail rigid. For a moment I thought I was alone, that Hannah had left without telling me. But then she stumbled out of the trees, barefoot and muddy to the knees, hair stuck to her forehead in damp streaks. She wore this little smile that didn't reach her eyes. I asked her what happened, where she'd gone. She just said, "Went for a walk, couldn't sleep." Her smile lingered longer than normal before she winked and said, "Don't look so worried, Sam, I'm fine." She didn't look fine, but I didn't want to overreact. This was the same Hannah I'd always known, spontaneous, a little impulsive. Still, it was strange for her to wander off barefoot in the pitch dark. I told her to let me know next time so I wouldn't panic. She looked at me with an odd tilt of her head, as though the concept of me panicking over her was somehow amusing. I chalked it up to the strangeness of the place. Maybe she was just enjoying the midnight air. Over the course of that day, though, I couldn't shake a feeling that something about Hannah had changed. She seemed more quiet, less apt to crack jokes. She also seemed fascinated by the fire pit, staring into its ash at times. Luca, normally friendly, or at least neutral, began to growl whenever Hannah got close to me. I found it embarrassing and tried scolding her, but the dog wouldn't relent. I ended up tying Luca to a nearby tree while Hannah rolled her eyes, calling Luca a moody mutt. Perhaps the weirdest part was how Hannah's eyes looked different. I had always remembered them as a warm brown. Now, in the sunlight, they had a grayish cast. I told myself it was my imagination, or maybe the lighting. We tried to make the best of our day. We followed the creek for a short distance, took pictures of some wildflowers, laughed about the lack of phone signal. Hannah apologized for scaring me that morning, and things felt semi-normal for a while. But the forest was doing us no favors. At one point, we realized that the map we were using had no correlation to the land around us anymore. We found ourselves on a ridge that shouldn't exist, according to the paper. The creek on the map curved south, but in reality it flowed north. It was confounding. Then our supplies began to degrade strangely fast. The bread we'd packed was suddenly covered in fuzzy mold. Some sealed protein bars felt soft and foul-smelling when we opened them. We started rationalizing that maybe the plastic packaging had been punctured. The only thing that didn't spoil was our freeze-dried meals. Foil pouches with dehydrated stew or pasta. Even that tasted stale, but at least it wasn't rotting. As evening settled in again, the temperature dropped sharply, and a cold wind blew. That's when we heard the first unmistakable shriek from somewhere far off in the trees. Not a coyote's yelp or an owl's screech. This sounded like a woman in pain. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. Hannah, who had been calm all day, tensed up. We exchanged looks, and without discussing it, we decided to build a bigger fire that night to keep watch. But no matter how large we tried to make the flames, the fire never felt warm enough. Sparks flew upward, swirling in the air. I had this persistent sense that we were being watched. Luca stared out into the forest with hackles raised. I kept shining my flashlight in the direction of her gaze, but I never saw anything beyond the swaying silhouettes of pines and oaks. Around midnight, I heard something that made my heart pound. Footsteps circling our campsite. Hannah heard it too. She jerked her head, scanning the perimeter. I grabbed Luca's leash. The footsteps stopped abruptly, leaving only the rustle of wind and the crackle of the flames. Then, from behind us, there was a whispery voice. It sounded female, but I couldn't make out words. Hannah rose to her feet, shining her flashlight wildly. Still, we saw nothing. When we decided to go to bed, mainly because we couldn't stand the tension of staring into the dark any longer, I turned off my flashlight and said a quick prayer, though I'm not a particularly religious person. In my sleeping bag, I held Luca close. She was trembling, which was not typical of her. Eventually, I drifted off. I awoke to chaos at around 3 in the morning. Luca was snarling and barking inside my tent, tugging violently at the leash. I scrambled up, my mind muddled with sleep. By the time I unzipped the tent, Hannah was standing there, her face contorted in rage or desperation. I couldn't tell which. She was soaked to the bone, as if she'd been swimming. There was a horrible smell, like stagnant pond water. Before I could ask what was going on, Luca lunged at her. It happened so fast. I remember seeing Luca's teeth bared as she launched, and Hannah bringing up a metal tent stake in a desperate motion. Then a flash of blood. Luca yelped. In confusion and terror, I grabbed for Luca's collar, screaming at both Hannah and my dog to stop. Hannah was breathing hard, eyes wild, and then I saw the stake embedded in Luca's side. Luca collapsed, and Hannah just stood there, chest heaving, that weird grin returning to her face. I lost it. I fell to my knees, pressing my hands over Luca's wound. She was bleeding heavily. Adrenaline was surging, and my instincts told me to do something. Apply pressure, bandage it. But in the darkness, without proper medical supplies, I was helpless. Luca's breathing grew shallow. Then she made a noise, like a sigh, and went still. Everything in me shattered. I looked up at Hannah with tears in my eyes, screaming something incoherent. She stared down at me, face half lit by the dying embers of the fire. She murmured, "She attacked me. I had to." Even in that moment of grief and confusion, something about Hannah's tone made me realize this wasn't just panic. She spoke calmly, almost monotonously, as if she was discussing the weather. My heart hammered. I was afraid of her, but also in shock. I spent the rest of that night in a stupor, kneeling beside Luca's body. I tried to wrap her in a blanket. Hannah wandered around the campsite, occasionally humming, muttering to herself. She kept repeating something like, "The water's warm here," or "She was going to kill me." It made no sense. By dawn, my eyes were raw from crying, and my mind felt frayed. When the sun rose, Hannah was nowhere to be found. The blanket I'd put over Luca was half pulled away, as though someone had inspected the body. Fighting nausea, I decided I couldn't stay here. My dog was dead, and my friend was clearly unhinged or possessed or something. My only chance was to leave for help, or at least to get away from Hannah. But as I began packing up, rolling up my bloody tent, shoving gear into my pack, I heard a sudden voice behind me. A man's voice this time, gravelly and low. I spun around, heart nearly bursting out of my chest. There stood a tall, broad man with a scruffy beard, one eye obscured by a milky film. He wore mud-stained jeans, a worn flannel jacket, and had a battered rucksack over one shoulder. "Jesus," I spat, stepping back. "You scared me." He just looked at Luca's body, then at me. Finally, he spoke. "Name's Jake Griggs. Didn't mean to startle you. You all right, ma'am?" I shook my head vehemently, stifling tears. My dog's dead, and my friend she's lost or crazy or something. I need help." Jake fixed me with a sympathetic but haunted expression. "I've seen some things in these woods," he muttered. "Some real bad things. Sister Miriam's at work again." I had no idea what he was talking about, but I was desperate enough to listen. He noticed how my gaze flitted around, and he gestured for me to follow him. Over the next hour or so, we walked half a mile through the woods toward what looked like an abandoned hunting shack. The journey was grueling, mostly uphill, my arms trembling from exhaustion and heartbreak. As we walked, Jake spoke in hushed tones, describing a local legend, a witch named Miriam or Sister Miriam. According to him, she was once a midwife who lived near Big Fork Ridge a century ago, in the days of raging droughts and suspicious townsfolk. She was blamed for children's deaths, for crop failures, for a town's misery. They accused her of witchcraft. Eventually, a group of men captured her, built a pyre in these woods, and burned her alive. But her spirit, or something even darker, remained. He claimed she watches over the ridge, luring campers and travelers, cursing them with illusions, rotting their supplies, twisting their minds until they destroy each other or themselves. The dog's death, he said, was the first sign that Sister Miriam had claimed us. It sounded insane, but then again, so was everything I'd witnessed. Hannah's weird behavior, the rotting supplies, the glitching compass, the bone in the fire pit. I listened in stunned silence. Jake rummaged in his shack for a moment, eventually producing a small pouch of grayish powder that he said was grave dust from a local cemetery. Supposedly, it could ground a restless spirit, at least temporarily. I was skeptical, but I was also clutching at any straw. He told me not to sleep on bare ground and to keep the grave dust around me if I sensed her presence. Then he warned me, "That friend of yours, she's either gone or changed. Better say your goodbyes." After that ominous note, Jake said he couldn't come with me. "I've lost too much already," he whispered, tapping his eye patch. "I stay close to the shack. Safer that way. You go on, find your own way." I begged him to show me a path out, to at least walk me to the nearest road. He just stared, guilt flickering across his face, then told me he'd mark a route. He found a scrap of paper and scribbled something resembling a map. A line from his shack heading west, crossing a creek, eventually hitting the gravel service road. If I followed that road north, I'd reach a highway. At least, that's what he promised. I set off, forcing myself to keep moving despite wanting to collapse. I had no time to mourn Luca. My chest ached, my thoughts swirled with images of her last breath. With each step, I felt this oppressive weight, as though the forest was pressing in on me. My plan was to get out, find a ranger, and send them back for Hannah. Despite all that had happened, I refused to believe my friend was completely lost. The forest, however, wasn't done toying with me. As I trudged uphill, I glanced at my watch. Nearly noon. Yet the sun seemed unnaturally low, the shadows long, the air cold. My watch then flickered from noon to 9 p.m. in an instant, the seconds ticking backwards. I shook it, tapped it, but it was definitely malfunctioning. Or time itself was malfunctioning. I tried counting my steps, told myself that maybe the battery was just dying, but a chill slid down my spine anyway. An hour later, I found the creek Jake mentioned, or I thought I did. It was narrower than I expected, and the water ran a different direction than what he'd drawn. My compass spun uselessly. The written directions might as well have been a foreign script. This was when I first felt real despair. For a minute, I stood knee-deep in the creek, sobbing. The water was so cold it made my legs ache, but my chest felt colder. Suddenly, I heard a familiar voice from upstream. Hannah's voice. My first reaction was relief. She was alive. I sloshed toward the source of the sound, calling her name. She didn't answer me directly, but she was humming that same quiet melody from the night before. I found her sitting on a mossy rock, her feet dipped in the running water. She turned to me. Her eyes looked even stranger now, like a milky gray color. Her hair was damp, and her lips had a bluish tint. She looked up, her grin slow, a tiny trickle of water running from the corner of her mouth. I wanted to scream at her, ask how she could have killed Luca. I wanted to shake her. But all that came out was a tremulous whisper. "Hannah, what's happening to you?" She stared for a moment, silent. Then her mouth moved, voice low and too calm. "He told me you'd come." "Who told you?" I asked, stepping closer, though fear wrapped around my heart. "Jake?" She began to giggle. The sound was half crazed, half childlike. "No, Sister Miriam. She came to me last night in the water. She said it wasn't your dog's time, but the dog attacked me, so I had to. You're upset, I see that. But she'll fix everything, Sam. She'll fix it all." I looked at her leg. There was no sign of the injury Luca had inflicted. In fact, she seemed perfectly fine. Too fine. She stood slowly, water dripping off her clothes. Her arms hung limply at her sides, but the grin remained. My brain seized up. I knew I had to get away or do something. I fumbled for the pouch of grave dust in my jacket pocket. With trembling fingers, I pulled it out. "Stay back," I warned. Hannah cocked her head curiously. When I took a step forward holding the dust, she bolted. One moment she was on the rock, and the next she was gone, disappearing into the trees with a disturbing speed that didn't look human. That's when I noticed a new phenomenon. The water around my ankles began to boil. Steam hissed upward, and a stench of sulfur clogged my nose. I leapt away, splashing to the bank. My skin burned where the water touched. No visible injuries, but the sensation of being scalded lingered. Terrified, I forced myself to keep moving downstream, hoping it would eventually lead to a known trail. The forest blurred around me. At times, I saw shapes flitting behind the trunks, glimpses of something pale. I kept thinking of Sister Miriam's legend, that she was burned alive, that she haunted these woods, that she might appear as a bloated figure or an apparition. I hoped I wouldn't see her, but I also feared she was controlling Hannah. After trudging on for what felt like hours, I checked my watch again. It read 2:27 p.m. The sun overhead looked like it was nearly sunset. I tried not to think about the bizarre discrepancies in time. I gritted my teeth and walked until my legs ached. When I finally broke through a clearing, I didn't see a road. Instead, I saw what looked like the same old campsite, our campsite, like I'd traveled in a giant circle. I saw the scattered ashes of our fire pit, the remains of my tent. And there, still lying on the ground, was Luca's body, half wrapped in that bloody blanket. That moment shattered me further. I stumbled to my knees, sobbing. I hated that I'd left her there. I approached, wanting to do something, bury her at least. But as I reached out to touch her fur, I froze. Her eyes were open. They weren't canine eyes anymore. They were a dull, clouded white, like a dead fish. My stomach lurched. Then she blinked. My dog blinked, even though I knew she was dead. It was the most horrifying thing I'd ever witnessed. I scrambled back, heart pounding. Luca let out a low whine. I heard her lips part, and a ragged inhalation that seemed to rattle her entire body. She tried to rise, legs spasming. In that instant, reason left me, replaced by primal terror. I grabbed the grave dust. My hands shook uncontrollably. I remember screaming incoherently as I hurled the dust onto Luca's corpse. A hiss sounded, and she collapsed back into lifeless stillness. Eyes dull, body going rigid as if pinned by an invisible force. I sat there, breathing like I'd just run a marathon, tears streaming. Then, from the darkness between the trees, I heard a scraping noise, like wet branches sliding across the ground. I forced myself to get up, pack what little gear I had left, and push onward. I didn't look back, not even at Luca, because some part of me knew that if I did, I would never be able to move again. I stumbled through the woods, half delirious. At times, I saw illusions of myself. Once, I spotted a figure ahead in the gloom, with hair like mine, wearing the same jacket, moaning softly. When I got closer, it vanished. Another time, I saw a reflection of me kneeling beside a creek, weeping. Then the reflection looked at me, eyes black. I nearly ran the other way. The forest felt like a labyrinth, or a living creature that changed its shape to keep me trapped. I don't recall exactly when or how I first encountered the old fire pit in the ground, the one that looked older than the campsite we used, ringed with ancient stones and filled with blackened bones. Child-sized. But I do remember the stench of charred flesh overwhelming me. I realized then that the entire ridge was dotted with these clandestine burn sites, all from different eras. Some might have been decades old, others maybe centuries. A swirl of horror overcame me. I pictured Sister Miriam's final moments, tied to a stake, flames devouring her. I wondered if all these bones belonged to her victims or to the townsfolk who once turned on her. That was when Hannah found me again. Or rather, I heard her first. Soft footsteps from behind, no attempt at stealth. I turned, raising my flashlight. She stood there, half her face illuminated. Every detail about her was wrong. Her skin looked almost translucent, veins visible beneath. Her hair was caked with mud. Her lips twitched into a grin I recognized but dreaded. She spoke in that calm, disconnected voice. "You see them, don't you? The bones. They're so warm, Sam, so very warm." I backed away, trying to remember what Jake said about the dust. My mind raced, uncertain if it was effective on a living person who was possessed. "Hannah, I'm sorry," I stammered, though I didn't know why I was apologizing. "Let me help you. I can get you to a hospital." She tilted her head, eyes flicking to the side. "A hospital can't fix me. I'm part of this place now, part of Miriam." I glanced around, considering an escape, but I was so tired. My legs felt like lead. I tried to talk to her again, telling her how we needed to leave, that her family would be worried, that she had so much life left. She let me ramble. Then she moved closer, each step deliberate, until I saw the madness swirling in her eyes. She whispered, "If we burn together, you won't hurt anymore. You can forget everything, your divorce, your loneliness, your pain. Miriam can take it all away." That was when I realized the betrayal was complete. The friend I knew was gone or twisted beyond recognition. She lunged for me, fingers clawing at my jacket. I pivoted, swinging the flashlight, striking her shoulder. The impact made her snarl, more animal than human. She tried to grab my wrist, maybe to yank me toward the pit. Desperate, I fumbled with the dust again, but she knocked it from my hands before I could open the pouch. She forced me back against a tree. Her strength was shocking, like she had the power of two people. Her nails raked my arms, leaving deep scratches. In a final act of desperation, I remembered the flare in my jacket pocket. I drew it out, jammed the tip into her side, and ignited it. The sudden bright light illuminated everything in crimson. She shrieked, staggering back, the flare sizzling against her clothes. While she was distracted, I scooped the grave dust from the ground, flung it at her face. A wave of power, or so it seemed, exploded outward. She dropped to her knees, clutching her face, black fluid dripping from her mouth. The forest around us reverberated with a chorus of screams, voices layered upon each other, as if we'd unleashed a legion of tortured souls. Sobbing, I forced myself to run. I realized I was heading down a slope, stumbling over roots and rocks, half blinded by the tears and adrenaline. The screams followed me, echoing. I still don't understand how I navigated the darkness without breaking a leg. I only know that I ended up at the same clearing again, the campsite, but everything looked slightly different. The trees around the perimeter seemed older, thicker. The shape of the fire pit had changed too, as if I traveled back or forward in time. Then I saw a horrific sight. Another me sat next to the ashes, wearing the same jacket, hair knotted, face streaked with tears. Our eyes locked, and it felt like staring into a mirror, except the reflection flickered. Then it rose, turned away, and vanished into the trees. In its place, I saw Luca's body again, half buried under leaves. I approached in shock. She was in advanced decomposition, far more decayed than she had been just hours earlier. It defied logic. My stomach twisted. I heaved, retching until bile burned my throat. Sister Miriam's presence pressed in on me, an almost palpable weight. I knew I had to do something about that ancient fire pit. Jake had told me that Miriam haunted the ridge, that she was burned. Perhaps the place of her torment was the key. In a frenzy, I started scooping away leaves and debris, uncovering more charred bones. The stench was overpowering. Something about the pit was still hot, as if coals simmered beneath the surface. My hands blistered from touching the soil. That's when Hannah appeared again, or some version of her. She looked half-burned now, flesh blackened across her arms and neck. She crawled toward me, leaving a trail of smoldering embers in her wake. I stared in wide-eyed terror, mind spinning. She rasped, "Help me," in a voice that sometimes sounded like Hannah and sometimes like a chorus of others. I realized the entire forest seemed to be screaming with us. Clouds scudded overhead, blocking the moonlight. Everything was tinted with darkness. I found a canister of camping fuel in my pack. I'd used it for a small propane stove. I don't recall deciding it was the right thing to do, I just acted on raw instinct. I poured the fuel around the pit, around Hannah, around everything. She stared at me, tears streaming down her charred cheeks. I whispered, "I'm sorry," before I struck a match. The flames roared to life, swallowing the pit in an instant blaze. Hannah screamed, her voice cycling through dozens of overlapping howls. The shapes around the trees, the illusions, the flickers of phantoms seemed to writhe in the firelight. I watched as Hannah's figure convulsed in the flames, half of me wanting to save her, the other half realizing she was already gone. She collapsed, and the shrieking died to a low roar of flames. Smoke choked the air. The forest groaned around me, as if in pain. Then, in the core of the blaze, I saw a figure. A woman with pale skin, hair draping down in black ropes, her face twisted by rot and anguish. She looked at me, lips curling into an almost sympathetic smile. Her eyes gleamed with malice. I knew it was Sister Miriam, or what remained of her. I yanked the grave dust pouch from my pocket, ignoring the burns on my hand, ignoring the tears streaming from my eyes. I flung the dust into the heart of the fire. Time seemed to tear open like a wound. I saw glimpses of an older era, men with torches surrounding a woman tied to a post. Then I saw modern campers, their eyes glassy, stumbling into these woods, never to return. I saw a flicker of Hannah as I knew her in college, smiling happily without any trace of this nightmare. Through it all, Sister Miriam reached toward me, lips parted as if trying to speak. My ears filled with a hideous buzzing that turned into a roar, and then everything burst in a flash of crimson flame, leaving me alone. Somehow, I survived that night. I crawled away from the burning pit, collapsing in exhaustion. My memories of what followed are disjointed. I recall staggering through the woods in darkness, the ground lighting up with the glow of distant embers. My watch said 4:10 p.m., but the sky was near pitch black. I may have passed out multiple times. My arms were cut up by brambles. My coat was partially singed. I had an open gash on my forehead that bled freely, but I forced myself onward because some survival instinct told me if I stopped, I would become part of this cursed place forever. At some point, I found a narrow dirt path that led me downhill. I think I heard voices or saw headlights. I crashed through a line of scrub and practically collapsed on a dirt road, face in the dust. That's where a group of park rangers found me. I was delirious, ranting about witches and bones and time loops. They had to carry me to their jeep. I vaguely remember them pressing me for details, but I'm not sure what I told them. By the time we got to the nearest hospital in Mina, the adrenaline had drained out of me. I slipped into a half-sleep full of nightmares. I don't know how many hours passed before I was coherent enough to speak to a ranger again. When I did, I begged them to go back for Hannah, to find her remains, do something. They told me they checked the GPS coordinates I'd given, but found no sign of a campsite, no bones, no body. They searched thoroughly and concluded I must have gotten lost, that maybe I'd hallucinated. They politely suggested I see a psychologist for post-traumatic stress. I have no illusions they believed a word I said. No official report was filed, except for a missing hiker's notice for Hannah Morales, which eventually got closed due to lack of evidence that she ever entered the forest with me in the first place. I suppose she never filed any official permits. She was just gone. That haunted me almost as much as Luca's death. When I finally returned to my home in Little Rock, I discovered that my cameras were missing all my photos from that first day. The memory cards were blank, except for a single corrupted file, a video that wouldn't play. My cell phone was still dead, and when I charged it, I found it had bizarre audio clips I'd never recorded. I heard my own voice whispering to Luca in a tone that sent shivers down my spine. The flames are warm here, aren't they? In the background, there was a strange crackling, and at one point, I swear I could hear Hannah softly humming. For weeks, I suffered nightmares. Images of Sister Miriam's face half obscured by flames, Hannah crawling across the ground, Luca blinking with human eyes. I could barely function. Friends and colleagues chalked it up to trauma. Therapy helped me accept that something terrible happened, though no rational explanation sufficed. Jake Griggs, the lone hiker who gave me the grave dust. The rangers found a deserted shack where he supposedly lived, but it had been empty for years. No one recognized the name. Sometimes, when the wind howls a certain way, I remember those nights with a jolt of panic. I catch the faint scent of rotting leaves and smoke, and I wonder if Sister Miriam still lingers, waiting for the next curious camper who ventures onto Big Fork Ridge. There are days I question my sanity. Did I truly see what I saw, or did grief and fear twist my reality? But deep down, I believe. Something unholy lives in those woods, and it cost me my dog, my friend, and whatever shards of innocence I had left. I still have the scars, literal ones, on my arms from Hannah's nails, and deeper ones in my mind. People ask if I'll ever go back to the Ouachitas. I usually just shake my head and change the subject. There's nothing that could drag me back. Yet, there's a part of me that hears the forest's whispers even in my dreams. Late at night, I sometimes sense a presence in my living room, the faint rustle of wind on the curtains, like someone slipping past. Once, I woke to the strong smell of sulfur. Another time, I found muddy footprints at my back door. And I can't help but fear that what happened in September of 2023 is far from over. The last recording on my phone, the one I only worked up the courage to listen to a few days after the hospital, is seared into my memory. The audio track is only 20 seconds long. There's static at first, then you can hear me breathing harshly. Suddenly, I let out a laugh, low and throaty, except it's not my laugh. It rises, distorts, turning into a layered voice, half mine, half something else. The final words it speaks are, "She burned once. She'll burn again." Then there's a shrill screech and the recording cuts out. No one else believes me, but I know what I heard. I can't shake the sense that I barely escaped, and that Sister Miriam wants me back. Maybe she's waiting for the perfect moment, or waiting for me to break down enough to return to those cursed woods in search of answers or closure. But if she is, let her wait forever. I have no intention of going back to Big Fork Ridge. I only hope that if other hikers venture there, they'll heed the warnings, or that the warnings will reach them in time. Because if you see a deserted campsite near a creek in the Ouachitas, a broken circle of stones, or find a map that leads you to that ridge, do yourself one favor. Turn around. Go home. There's nothing but darkness waiting in those woods. Darkness that can snatch your dog, your friend, your sanity, and maybe even your soul. I'm still Samantha Carter, 32 years old. But sometimes, when I look in the mirror, I notice my eyes have taken on a grayish tint, especially when the light hits them just right. I try to remind myself it's just stress or a trick of the light. Yet, part of me wonders if I didn't make it out of Big Fork Ridge entirely. Part of me is certain that Sister Miriam left a mark. Sometimes at night I laugh in my sleep, and I hear two voices. My name is Emily Harper. I'm 29 years old. This happened in early October of last year, 2024, during what was supposed to be a 4-day hiking trip near Tyler Bend in the Buffalo National River Wilderness in Arkansas. I can't say for sure that anyone who hears this story will believe me. I can hardly believe it myself. But I've had months to convince myself it was real, and I promise you it was. I grew up in Kansas City, and my mother and I always dreamed about taking a long hiking trip together. She never got the chance. She died of cancer last spring, leaving me with a small insurance policy and boxes of family keepsakes, including an old brass compass from her father. For reasons I can't entirely explain, I fixated on that compass. It represented something I'd lost, something I felt I needed to reclaim. So, as a way of coping, I decided to do the hike she'd always talked about. My friend April and I would join a more experienced hiker named Jared, someone I'd met online in a nature forum, to explore a remote wilderness loop near Tyler Bend. Looking back, I should have realized something was off long before we arrived. The final weekend in September had come with freak weather, and the local forecast predicted thunderstorms, flash floods, and massive temperature swings. Still, Jared insisted he'd done that loop before, and that it wasn't too extreme. April, my old college roommate, had reservations, but she decided to tag along out of loyalty. We planned the entire route in detail. 4 days, moving north from Tyler Bend along a lesser-known trail, then looping back to the main network. We had enough food, gear, and emergency equipment for a week if we needed it. Everything seemed locked in. I'd like to say my story began the moment we stepped onto the trail, but in retrospect, it started with a series of smaller details that, taken alone, would have meant nothing. It began with my phone losing its signal an hour earlier than expected, while we were still on the paved road. April's phone lost its charge entirely, plummeting from 90% to 0 in mere minutes. Jared laughed it off. Technology fails sometimes, he said. We drove another hour, reached Tyler Bend just as the sun was setting, and set up a small base camp near the official campsite, planning to start the real trek at first light. That night, we huddled by a meager fire while Jared tried to show me how to read an older topographic map. He had it from the 1970s, stained and frayed at the edges, the corners wrapped in protective plastic. Next to that, he laid out a modern printout of the same area. They matched decently, but the older map contained a few side trails that seemed to vanish from any modern reference. We agreed we might explore them if time allowed. I remember that conversation well because right in the middle of Jared explaining contour lines, the fire flared bright blue. There was no wind, no chemical in the wood that I could guess at, yet for 2 full seconds the flame was an otherworldly color. Then it went out, as if someone had flipped a switch, left us in near darkness, with only our headlamps and a sliver of moon to see by. April said, "That's weird," but then she shrugged. We all shrugged, really. Strange, but not impossible. We gathered more kindling, got the fire going again, and chalked it up to a fluke. By the time we went to bed, we were more tired than suspicious. The next morning, I woke in my tent to find my sleeping bag lying open, unzipped from the inside. I had no memory of unzipping it in the night. April and Jared were already up, so I put my confusion aside, chalking it up to restless sleep. Maybe I'd overheated and unconsciously undone it, just a small odd moment. We officially started the hike around 8 a.m. The weather was perfect at that point. Mild sun, a cool breeze. We left our car at the Tyler Bend parking area, strapped on our backpacks, and walked into the forest. The first few miles were exactly what I'd always pictured. Tall oaks, the bright green canopy gently swaying. We had a large portion of the day ahead, we were well prepared, and I felt close to my mother's memory. Jared led us deeper, following the trail markers, while April hung behind me. She teased me about the plan for 4 days. "You're sure you don't want to do something easier, like a spa weekend?" she joked. I just laughed. I didn't realize then that it might have been a real concern on her part. Around midday, we reached a slope leading down to a wide ravine. We stopped for lunch, which consisted of dehydrated meals and energy bars. We took out April's phone to see if she'd gotten any battery life back after charging it in the car the night before. Still nothing, not a flicker. The phone was effectively bricked. I tried my own phone, but out here there was no reception. It was expected, though. Jared, who had done a few trips in the Ouachita National Forest and some near Buffalo River, teased that phone reception was a fantasy in these parts. He jokingly tapped his antique compass, matching it to the old topographic map. He insisted that as long as we had the map and a backup, we'd be fine. Things got complicated after lunch. April's new GPS unit, a small handheld one from a reputable brand, refused to display anything beyond our immediate location. The screen showed the little triangle that represented us, but it wouldn't load the topographic lines or the route we'd downloaded beforehand. It blinked over and over, refreshing. Jared tried messing with the settings, but it never pulled up the actual map. "Weird," April said. "I just updated the firmware. Maybe it's glitching, or we lost satellite coverage." "Probably the canopy," Jared offered. "Let's trust the paper for now." No one panicked. We still had Jared's older topographic, plus a more recent printout we'd brought along as a backup. We decided we'd keep going. None of us expected any real trouble. We hiked about 4 more hours, eventually leaving the well-traveled portion of the trail for a less obvious offshoot that Jared said led to a scenic waterfall. By the time we were nearing sunset, we decided to set up camp before we lost the light. We found a decent spot on relatively flat ground, near a little stream. We pitched our tents, dividing tasks. Jared and I gathered firewood. April got the water filtration system going. By the time we were done, we had a cozy little site. Or so it seemed. That's when the next strange thing happened. As soon as Jared struck a match and tried to light the kindling, the flame extinguished itself. He tried again, and again. Each time the flame touched the wood but did nothing. My mother's old brass compass, which was in my pocket, started to feel unnaturally cold. I pulled it out, and the metal was freezing, so cold it stung my fingertips in the autumn air. I tucked it away, trying to ignore the chill that ran from my hand up my arm. April joined us, baffled by why we couldn't get the fire going. She grabbed some tinder from her pack, an accelerant-laced tinder meant for emergency situations, and tried that. It took 5 attempts, but eventually we got the smallest flicker to catch. The logs hissed as if they were soaked in water, even though they were dry. Finally, the wood burned in a crackling, bizarrely subdued way, the flame drifting between orange and a faint purple hue. We sat around that strange, stubborn fire, telling each other it was probably some weird fungus or moisture causing the color shift. The smoke smelled musty, almost rotten. At the time, it was unsettling, but it didn't scare me, not yet. Night descended quickly. I grew restless, so I told the others I was going to take a short walk along the stream. It was maybe a 5-minute stroll, but enough to clear my head. I took my mother's compass in one hand and my headlamp in the other. Along the bank, I saw footprints. Human footprints leading away from our campsite and up a slope. They were deeper than mine, as if whoever made them was heavier or sinking into soft mud. I followed them for maybe 20 yards, shining my light around. There was no sign of another camper or hiker. The footprints just stopped. The mud ended abruptly, as though the footprints had dissolved into nothing. I returned to camp, unsettled. April was leaning against a tree, picking burrs out of her socks, while Jared rummaged through his pack. April asked where I'd gone, and I told her. She frowned, looked at Jared. "You think anyone else is out here?" "Could be," Jared said. "It's not a restricted area, maybe a local or another hiker." We had a quick dinner of freeze-dried chili mac, forcing ourselves to ignore the rancid whiff that kept drifting in from the forest. Jared blamed rotting leaves. Eventually, he yawned and said he'd turn in, leaving me and April alone by the flickering purple-orange fire. We were both tired, but we stayed up a bit longer, making small talk about old college memories. She teased me gently about going all in on a big hiking trip to honor my mom, but she also said she respected me for facing the outdoors. She knew I wasn't the type who'd grown up camping. I was touched. It reminded me how loyal and kind April really was. It's still painful to think about how quickly that changed. That night, I slept fitfully. I dreamed of footsteps circling my tent, a soft humming that I couldn't identify. When I woke with a jolt, it was pitch black. I heard another zipper. I half expected to see someone open my tent, but the noise stopped. My adrenaline ran high, but eventually I must have drifted off again because the next thing I knew, it was dawn. In the morning, I discovered my sleeping bag unzipped again, just like the previous day, but this time it wasn't on me at all. It was crumpled near the tent door. Even stranger, the bottom half of the bag was soaked with muddy water. I turned on my headlamp and checked for tears in the tent floor. Nothing. No holes. Where'd that water come from? My shoes were also damp, like they'd been submerged. It made no sense. I changed into my spare socks and stepped outside. Jared and April had woken early. They had that same baffled look on their faces. Jared announced that some of our supplies had gone bad. Gone bad isn't even the right term. Several sealed ration packs were covered in greenish-black mold, as if they'd been left in a damp basement for months. April tested the vacuum seal. It was intact. "This is impossible," she muttered. "They must have had some contamination at the factory." We chalked it up to an unlucky batch. But in the back of my mind, I knew that even in the worst case, freeze-dried rations don't rot like that overnight. It was another sign, one we all tried to ignore. Despite the lost supplies, we still had enough for a few more days, and we could always try to fish or forage if needed. Jared said we should move on, maybe find a better spot to camp the next night. hopefully drier ground. We spent the morning hiking upstream, noticing that the forest around us grew denser and darker. The terrain became more challenging too, with slopes full of slippery leaves. At one point, a branch snapped under Jared's foot, sending him sliding down a small ravine. He landed hard but wasn't hurt beyond a bruise or two. Still, it put us all on edge. By midday, our progress had slowed to a crawl. April's expensive GPS was still glitching, showing only that little arrow on a blank screen. Jared's older map seemed to indicate we should cross the stream to reach a well-trodden trail on the far side, but crossing was risky. We found a place where the water was about knee-high, and carefully made our way across, stepping over mossy rocks. The water was colder than I'd expected, cutting through my boots. On the far bank, we spotted carved symbols in a cluster of tree trunks, circles overlapping with crosses, wavy lines leading into spirals. They looked old. The wood around the carvings was gnarled and gray. I felt a sinking dread, the same kind you get when you realize you're somewhere you shouldn't be. Time seemed to bend oddly that afternoon. The sun, which had been overhead, dropped behind the trees faster than I could have accounted for. I checked my watch, a cheap digital. It said 3:14 p.m. Yet the sky had that late dusk feeling, as if it were nearly sunset. Jared frowned at his own watch, which read 2:58 p.m. "Huh?" he said quietly, but offered no explanation. We pressed on, half convinced we were just disoriented. We eventually found a small clearing with rock overhangs. Jared suggested we make camp there, given the short daylight. April looked uneasy. "We've only gone, 6 or 7 miles total today?" "It might be enough," Jared said. "This might be the best spot we'll find for the night." Something about the clearing felt old, ancient. The ground was rocky, with bits of flint and scattered shards of what might have once been pottery. Behind the largest boulder stood a weathered stone foundation. A crumbled rectangle, maybe the remains of an old homestead. There was nothing left but a few stacked stones forming half a wall. A few spindly saplings grew inside. Jared and I began to set up the tents while April went to gather some firewood. After a few minutes, I went to help her. I walked a dozen yards into the woods, calling her name, but I couldn't see any sign of her. I listened carefully, hearing only the faint trickle of water from the stream behind us. "April?" I called again. Suddenly, she stepped out from behind a tree wearing a weirdly wide smile. She was carrying a small stack of sticks and logs. Her eyes looked glassy in the late afternoon light. "You okay?" I asked. She nodded, then said in a dreamy voice, "Yeah, I'm good, just a little lost in thought." She blinked slowly, too slowly. "You scared me. Sorry if I worried you." The hairs on my neck stood on end. Something felt off, though I couldn't pinpoint exactly what. Still, I forced a laugh. "You had me worried for a second. Couldn't see you anywhere." April just kept smiling. She blinked again, taking a long moment between each motion. Then she walked back toward camp, dropping the wood near Jared. As the two of them arranged the fire pit, I noticed April humming a low, repetitive lullaby. It had a sing-song pattern, but I didn't recognize it. She'd never hummed that tune before. When we settled in around the fire, which, thankfully, caught a bit easier than the previous night, April's strange demeanor persisted. She'd stare at me with that too long smile, as though she was waiting for me to say something, then glance away as if embarrassed. She barely ate, poking at her food absent-mindedly. Jared, however, seemed oblivious, or at least he was trying to act like everything was normal. Later, as darkness fell, I mentioned my mother. I told them how this entire trip was partly a memorial for her. She'd been gone 6 months, and I was still grieving. Jared rested a comforting hand on my shoulder. April just stared into the fire, her eyes reflecting the orange-purple glow. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing footsteps outside my tent, going around and around. Sometimes they paused directly behind me as if listening. Other times, they shuffled faster. The moment I unzipped my tent, though, everything went silent. By morning, I felt frantic with confusion. That's when I made a grim discovery. Half of our remaining rations, ones sealed in thick foil, had also grown moldy, clumps of fuzzy rot that reeked of decay. April was crouched over them, running her fingers across the foil. "We can't eat any of this," she said flatly. Then she turned to me, those dark eyes flickering, and said, "I guess it doesn't matter." It was an odd remark, sounding more like resignation than concern. Jared had gone off to search for water, so I was alone with her. I had to remind her that we needed food. "April, of course it matters. We need calories, especially if we're going to keep hiking." She shrugged. "Maybe we won't leave. Maybe we should stay. There's plenty to see here." Goosebumps prickled my arms. "Stay?" I repeated. "No, we need to keep going. We still need to circle back." Her mouth opened as if she wanted to say something else, but she said nothing. Then she returned to poking at the moldy rations, humming that same lullaby from the night before. When Jared returned, we told him about the lost food. He cursed softly. "We can make do," he said. "We have water. We can scavenge, fish if we have to. I've done that before." He sounded more optimistic than he looked. We agreed to pack up quickly and move on, but while we were disassembling our tents, a freak storm rolled in. It struck fast, thunder, lightning, and a downpour that drenched us. The ground became a slick mess. I remembered Jared yelling something about finding shelter back at the stone foundation. We scrambled back there, huddling under the partial wall, with water soaking through our jackets. After nearly an hour, the rain let up, but the path out of the clearing was now a muddy, impassable slope. It would be risky to leave just yet. So we stood there checking our gear for damage. That's when the next impossible thing happened. Jared was looking at his old map, then he cursed. "What the hell?" "What's wrong?" I asked, stepping closer. He tapped a finger on the paper. It was the same topographic we'd been using, but the route he'd drawn in pencil was now different. Instead of showing a small loop around the stream, it diverged into a wavy line that passed by the stone foundation. "I didn't mark this," he said. The pencil strokes were definitely from his pencil, the same thickness and lead color. But the shape was unrecognizable, almost chaotic. "I marked a loop around that side," Jared insisted, pointing to the older route lines. I don't know where this came from." April peered over his shoulder with that same eerie smile. "That's the new path," she murmured. She reached out and tapped the map, dragging her index finger along the fresh pencil line. Then she giggled and turned away. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the recent downpour. I was about to question her, but April walked off, heading around the far side of the foundation without a word. Jared stuffed the map back in his pocket, looking spooked. "Something's going on with her," he muttered. "I don't know if she's dehydrated or what." We waited a few more hours for the ground to dry a little. The wind picked up, making it a challenge to keep our balance on the muddy slope. Eventually, we decided we had to move. We gathered our gear, leaving the foundation behind, and began to climb out of that hollow. As we emerged back into the forest, the shadows seemed to lengthen. My mother's brass compass spun wildly, never once finding north. April walked behind us, humming softly, stopping to scratch at the bark of certain trees. When I shone a flashlight on her hands, I saw dried blood on her fingertips. I nearly gagged, but said nothing. Fear was threading its way into my thoughts, yet I couldn't fully grasp what was happening. We tried to press north, aiming to connect with a known segment of trail. Hours passed. The sun should have set, but the light remained stuck in an odd twilight state. I glanced at my watch, 6:32 p.m., then 7:15 p.m., then 6:01 p.m. The digital readout was flickering, refusing to settle on a single time. I felt dizzy, as if the forest itself was warping around me. Eventually, we found a small vantage point near a rocky bluff. From there, we could see the valley below. The sky was heavy with rolling clouds. We decided we'd camp one more time before making a push to find a ranger or a more established campsite. None of us said it explicitly, but we all knew we needed help. Something wasn't right. The land, or maybe we ourselves, nothing made sense anymore. As darkness finally came for real, we set up camp near the edge of the bluff, carefully avoiding any drop-offs. Jared tried to spark a conversation, maybe to break the tension. He asked about my mother, about how I ended up meeting him online. We ended up sharing a few laughs about the weird personalities in outdoors forums. For a moment, things felt almost normal. Then we realized April was gone again. At first, I assumed she was off gathering wood or going to the bathroom, but she didn't return. Jared and I circled the campsite with our flashlights, calling her name. No reply. My heart pounded with a new kind of fear. The fear of losing my friend in a haunted stretch of forest. We searched until we were too exhausted to keep going, scouring the immediate area, following faint footsteps until they vanished. Finally, near midnight, we had to concede. We'd search again in the morning. Neither of us slept. We had no fire. We were too shaken to attempt one, and the wood was soaked from the storm. I lay awake, just listening, my eyes glued to the fabric of the tent above me, trying to piece together the events of the last 3 days. I must have dozed off at some point, because I woke to faint sunlight creeping through the nylon. Jared was outside, pacing. That's when I saw him recoil, as if startled. I crawled out and saw April standing at the edge of our little clearing, her hair a tangled mess, her clothes covered in mud. She wore that half smile, blinking too rarely. "April," I cried, rushing toward her. She didn't hug me or reach out. She just stared at me, then looked past me at Jared. "Where have you been?" I demanded. "We were worried sick." She just shrugged, the motion jerky. "Nowhere," she answered, voice low. "I heard you calling." Then she stepped forward, placed her hand on my shoulder. I flinched. Her skin was feverishly hot. "I'm sorry," she said, but her tone was flat, unconvincing. We led her back to the campsite. She refused water at first, but eventually took a few sips. I noticed her glancing at Jared the way a cat might watch a mouse. I couldn't decide if it was hunger or anger, but it made my stomach twist. Jared tried to be calm, friendly. He asked where she'd gone, but she avoided eye contact and said only, "I couldn't remember the way back." She'd drop these statements in a flat monotone, then smile a little too widely. Time pressed on, so we decided we'd break camp and attempt to make a final push-out. Jared and I discussed it quietly, deciding we should find any official trail or backcountry ranger station, or even just a known path. We'd get April help. She seemed delirious or possibly ill, but we needed to keep moving. April insisted on carrying Jared's backpack. "Yours is heavier, right?" she said, her tone strangely eager. Jared refused, of course, but she insisted. "Let me take it," she repeated. Her voice had an edge of mania. I tried to intervene, but she snapped at me, her face contorting. The expression lasted only a second before she returned to that placid half-smile. "Fine, fine," Jared said, trying to placate her. "But let me take out some of the heavier stuff." "No," she hissed. Then she blinked, smiled. "No, it's okay," she added more softly. "I'll carry it as is." The rest of the morning was awkward, with April trailing behind us, carrying that heavier pack without complaint. We soon realized it wasn't a normal day. The forest was unnaturally silent. No birds, no insects buzzing. It was like the entire area had gone dead, holding its breath. Around midday, Jared and I conferred in whispers. We'd noticed April leaving small trinkets in the dirt, stones arranged in circles, bits of string twisted into shapes. She seemed to be marking a path, but we had no idea why. I tried to confront her gently about it, but she just shook her head, humming that lullaby. That was the last time we tried to reason with her. We found ourselves at the base of a steep incline, our steps slowed by the slick earth. Jared led, I was behind him, and April lagged several yards behind me. At one point, Jared turned to help me over a fallen log. Our eyes met. For the first time, I saw real fear in him. I don't think either of us had any illusions that this trip would end peacefully anymore. Suddenly, we realized April wasn't behind us. Spinning around, we saw her a dozen yards away, holding a sharpened stick. Blood dripped from her left hand, staining the mud. She made a low growl, almost like an animal. Jared said, "April, what's going on?" He took a cautious step toward her. She lunged without warning, striking him in the chest with the makeshift spear. The impact knocked him backward. He yelped in pain. I screamed, scrambling to help, but I slipped in the mud. For a moment, I lay there, eyes wide, as she pinned him down. The sharpened stick pressed into his neck. She was chanting something low and guttural, the words not in English. Jared's face flushed with panic, and he tried to wrestle her off, but she was unnaturally strong. I was scrambling to grab anything, a rock, a branch, to help. My fingertips found a decent-sized stone, slick with mud. I lunged forward, smashing it against April's arm. She snarled, turning on me with eyes so dark they looked hollow. Jared managed to roll out of her grip, clutching the bleeding wound on his chest. I scrambled to grab the sharpened stick, tossing it away. April let out a hideous laugh, laced with tears. She stepped toward me. I froze, expecting to feel her nails tear at my throat, but something made her stop. For a moment, the mania faded from her eyes, replaced by confusion or sorrow. She muttered, "I didn't want." Then her face contorted again. She whirled, snatched up the sharpened stick, and drove it straight into Jared's neck in one horrifying motion. He gurgled, tried to speak, but blood spurted. I watched as he collapsed, eyes wide with shock. His hands scrabbled uselessly at the wound, bright red, staining the muddy ground. I screamed until my throat burned, fumbling for him, wanting to stanch the blood. My logical mind knew it was hopeless. He bled out within seconds, eyes rolling back. April stood over him, shoulders trembling. She looked down at Jared with an expression I can only describe as heartbreak. Then she started to cry, or maybe laugh, each sob shaking her body. I tried to scramble backward away from her. My pulse pounded in my ears. In a trembling voice, I asked, "Why, April? Why would you—" She pivoted to me, face streaked with tears, but her eyes were empty. "We can't leave," she whispered. "You should understand that by now." Then, before I could move, she ran off into the forest at a speed I didn't think possible, disappearing behind clusters of trees and ferns. For a long time I sat there, cradling Jared's lifeless body. My mind refused to accept what had just happened. The man who had let us out here, who joked and flirted and tried to reassure me, was now sprawled in the mud, eyes open but seeing nothing. I sobbed until I had no tears left, the drizzle of rain pattering around us. At some point, I realized I needed to move. This place felt alive, watching me. The trees groaned. The wind whispered. I looked at Jared's face one last time, gently closed his eyes, and forced myself to go. The forest was telling me to run, or so I thought, but my foot snagged on a root and I nearly fell over again. My mom's brass compass, which I had in my jacket pocket, fell out, hitting the mud. I picked it up. The face of the compass had cracked, and the needle swung uselessly, but the metal no longer felt unnaturally cold. I staggered onward, leaving Jared's body behind. I think a part of me knew there was nothing else I could do. My only goal became escape. I didn't know how. The forest around me looked different than it had earlier that day. Even the slope we'd climbed seemed to shift behind me. But I forced myself forward, step by step, ignoring the throbbing pain in my knees and the numb terror in my mind. Eventually, I recognized the stone foundation from earlier. Panic choked me. How had I circled back? I was sure I'd been heading north, away from that area. But there it stood, half-collapsed walls and creeping vines. This time, though, there was something else there. Photographs. They were pinned or tacked to the stone, some half buried in the dirt. I shined my flashlight on them, noticing my own face in one. I was asleep in the photo, lying in my tent. Another showed me walking along the stream. Another showed Jared and me sitting by the fire. My heart hammered as I recognized, with utter certainty, that I had never seen these photos before. They must have been taken within the last few days. A choked sob rose in my throat. Was April responsible, or was it something else? I stumbled away, fear gripping me so tightly I could barely breathe. The path beyond the foundation snaked into a deeper hollow. The trees arched overhead, forming a tunnel. I felt them twisting, bending to watch me. My sense of time dissolved. My watch was blank, refusing to show any numbers. Whenever I tried to check how long I'd been walking, it flickered nonsensically or turned off entirely. At last, I came across a small stream, possibly the same one we'd crossed earlier. My boots were caked in mud, my clothes soaked. I used the freezing water to clean my hands and face, mindful of the fact that April might be anywhere. The memory of her eyes, the wrongness in her smile haunted me. She hadn't just killed Jared. There was an inhuman rage in her, a presence that felt like it was using her body. She was my friend, but she was gone, replaced by something monstrous. The next hours are a blur. At times, I thought I heard voices or footsteps behind me. Other times, I was sure I heard chanting. Once, I glimpsed a figure in the trees who I thought was April. I heard that low humming, the tune she'd repeated in camp. I hid behind a log, stifling my sobs, praying she wouldn't see me. I heard her breathing, that wet, ragged sound. Then she moved on. I stayed crouched there, tears cutting tracks through the dirt on my cheeks. Eventually, I knew I had to move. I forced myself to keep going, ignoring my throbbing ankles and knees. Every step felt like it could be my last. The forest seemed endless, and night had fallen. I stumbled across a slope, up and over, until the trees thinned out. Something told me I was getting close to an actual trailhead or established route. The compass was shattered, but I still held it, as though it was a talisman. I told myself that if I could just follow the slope downward, I'd reach a known path. And then, unbelievably, I did. I emerged onto a dirt service road, a battered sign pointing to Tyler Bend 5 miles east. My heart soared. I couldn't stop crying. I looked behind me, half expecting to see April or something else chasing me, but the trees were quiet. I limped for what felt like hours along that dirt road. The moon was out, giving me enough light to see the ruts and puddles. My entire body ached. My mind reeled, trying to process all I'd witnessed. I tried not to picture Jared's eyes. I tried not to hear April's chanting. It was impossible. At some point, the distant glow of headlights appeared. I staggered onto the middle of the road, waving my arms. A truck slowed to a stop. I was delirious, hardly able to speak. The driver was a park ranger. He lifted me into the passenger seat, gave me water, and started radioing for help. That's when I realized the date on his dashboard read October 15th, almost a week after we'd left for what was supposed to be a 4-day trip. By my reckoning, we should have been out there for only 3 or 4 days total, maybe 5 at most, but not 9 or 10. My entire sense of time shattered. The ranger took me to the nearest station. I told him everything. At first, he was sympathetic, but as my story got stranger, I saw the doubt in his eyes. Maybe he thought I was insane or dehydrated, or maybe I had an infection. Still, he got a search party out looking for my friends. They found Jared's body near that muddy slope. Oddly enough, they reported it looked fresh, as if he died only an hour before they arrived. A single wound to the neck, blood still bright red. They were baffled. Search teams scoured the area for April, but no sign was found. The official report stated that she might have wandered off or been injured. There was speculation about potential foul play, especially since I was the only witness. My story, whispering trees, photos pinned to old stone walls, moldy rations rotting overnight, was impossible for them to accept. I stayed in a local hospital for a few days, receiving IV fluids and undergoing psychological evaluations. They found no drugs in my system, no serious injuries aside from cuts and bruises. My hair had streaks of gray near the temples, which the doctors attributed to trauma or stress. My mother's compass was with my belongings, but the glass face was entirely broken, the needle missing. They ended up returning it to me, though I could barely bring myself to look at it. Eventually, after the initial shock wore off, I was released. The official cause of Jared's death remains unknown. Well, officially. They never found April. I gave them my statements, but the local authorities had no reason to believe anything supernatural or unexplainable was at work. The case was left open, with suggestions that she might have been delusional, or that I might be lying. I suspect I'll never know their true opinions. I returned home to Kansas City, burying myself in grief and guilt. Nightmares followed. I see April standing over Jared, her eyes black and brimming with tears. I see the rotting rations, the swirling compass needle, and those footprints in the mud that abruptly ended. The worst dream is always the same. I'm back in the forest. The stone foundation is around me, and I hear the sound of a camera shutter. When I turn, I see a figure shaped like my mother, but it's not her. She's holding a photograph of me, whispering my name again and again. The story should end here, but it doesn't. Sometimes, late at night, I'll be half asleep when my phone buzzes. I'll glance at it and see that a call is coming in from an unrecognized number. The ID says something impossible. April. I never answer. My phone will ring 3 times, then stop. A minute later, I'll check again, but there's no record of an incoming call. People might say it's a glitch, but I know better. I can feel it in my chest, in the sudden tightness of my lungs and the sweat on my palms. I've tried to rebuild my life. I've returned to work. I see a therapist weekly, and I've made small progress in letting go of my guilt. Yet, a part of me is still in that forest. Sometimes, I catch a flash of movement out of the corner of my eye, or a glimpse of a face in a reflective window. The face is always blank, eyes too wide, with a smile that doesn't belong in this world. That's how I know I'll never truly escape. The hollow is still with me, whispering just out of sight. And I know, beyond any doubt, that April is there too, lost, possessed, or something worse. The official search teams gave up after a few months. Another local rumor. Another missing person in the wilderness. It happens, they say. The Buffalo National River area is sprawling and rough. Once the trail grows cold, it's easy to disappear. I try not to wonder if she's still out there, wandering among the trees, humming that lullaby to herself, waiting for the next unfortunate hiker to cross her path. But I have nightmares that she's standing by the stone foundation, a camera in her hand, adding more photos to that macabre gallery on the walls. Sometimes I can't sleep. I'll sit at my dining table, flipping open my mother's broken compass, staring at the fractured face. I wonder if maybe the forest cursed it, or if it was just a piece of the puzzle that led me there. There's no answer. There never will be. All I know is that it's over and not over. The forest let me go, but it never truly gave me back. And if you ever find yourself near Tyler Bend, or if you see footprints in the mud that stop suddenly, or if your sleeping bag unzips from the inside in the middle of the night, turn back. Turn back before you become part of the whispering hollow that stole my friend, my sanity, and any illusion of safety I once had. Because once that place has its hooks in you, it doesn't let go. It never lets go. My name is Claire Whitman. I was 29 years old when this happened in early October of last year, 2024. If you're reading this, I can't guarantee you'll believe me, but I need to share it anyway, to try and put the pieces together and convince myself it was real. Because now, I'm not so sure I ever left those woods. Sometimes I wonder if a part of me is still there, wandering that cursed trail. I drove from Dallas to Ouachita National Forest on a Friday morning, excited for my first proper solo camping trip. I'm a graphic designer, not a ranger or a soldier. No special training or wilderness survival expertise beyond what YouTube or my dog Baxter could teach me. Baxter was 4 years old, a golden retriever with a happy face and big trusting eyes. My plan was simple. Spend 4 nights on the remote Fourche Mountain Trail, get away from the noise and heartbreak of my life for a while, and prove I could handle something on my own after my divorce. I arrived at the trailhead around noon. It was unmarked, a dirt pull-off near an old sign that read Fourche Mountain Trail. Use at your own risk. There weren't any other vehicles. The forest around me was vibrant with autumn color. Rusty browns, golds, the occasional speck of red. I felt that subtle thrill of being alone somewhere wild, but I was also a bit uneasy. The hush of the woods was so complete it felt like stepping into a church when no one's around. I shrugged off my nerves, strapped on my pack, checked my phone. 1 bar of signal. Good enough to text my sister that I was starting my hike. Then Baxter and I set off. The first mile was unremarkable, just a winding path through the towering pines. The crisp wind stirred the leaves, and Baxter ran ahead, nose to the ground, tail wagging. I was proud of him. He'd been my companion for years. After my marriage ended, we'd grown even closer. By mid-afternoon, the trail opened onto a small clearing. I was thinking about finding a campsite when I heard movement up ahead. At first, I thought it might be a deer or a stray hiker. It turned out to be a man, a fellow camper turning the bend. "Hey there," he called with a smile. He looked to be around my age, maybe a little older, wearing a well-worn baseball cap and hiking clothes. "You out here alone?" I could have lied, but there was no point. "Yeah, just me and my dog." I patted Baxter, who was sniffing the man's boots. "I'm Nathan Ross," he said, offering his hand. "Camping for a couple nights. Haven't seen anyone else out here. Wasn't sure if this trail was just deserted." We chatted for a few minutes, neither of us wanting to linger awkwardly. He suggested we hike together until dark to find a decent campsite. Then, if one of us wanted to split off in the morning, we could. He seemed harmless enough, maybe a bit cocky, but not in a creepy way. Having a bit of company felt safer, so I agreed. We walked for another couple of hours, crossing a shallow creek, carefully stepping over slick rocks. There was a moment when Baxter's ears perked, and he lifted his muzzle, sniffing fiercely at the wind. He let out a low growl. I paused, scanning the trees. Nothing but a rustle of leaves. Then Baxter relaxed, wagging his tail, and we kept going. We made camp in a mossy patch among tall pines. The sun was dipping behind the hills, setting the sky on fire. We set up our tents, coaxed a small fire to life, and I heated up some soup. Nathan cracked jokes about how he swore he'd heard the local folks talk about ghosts in these parts, old superstitions about barefoot kids in the woods. I admitted I liked ghost stories, but that they didn't scare me too much. Famous last words, I remember thinking. That evening, everything felt normal. Baxter lay curled by my feet. Nathan told me about his failed stint as a realtor. He never mentioned a family or wife, though I got the sense he'd also left something behind. The first odd thing happened after we turned in for the night. I woke around midnight to the sound of footsteps circling my tent. Light footsteps, but definitely human, or at least bipedal. My heart hammered. Baxter growled at the door flap, low and menacing. I unzipped the flap a tiny bit and shone my flashlight around. Empty darkness. No sign of Nathan, no sign of anyone. I stepped outside, shivering in the cold air. I wasn't sure if my imagination was running away from me. Then I noticed something in the dirt beside my tent. A single, perfectly formed barefoot footprint, far too small to be an adult's. My stomach tightened. Why would a child be out here in the middle of nowhere? I got Baxter to settle, then stood there for a bit, scanning the dark trees. Aside from the shifting glow of our fire's embers, the woods were silent. The next morning, the first real sign of trouble emerged. Nathan was gone. No note, nothing. But I noticed something weird. The space where his tent had been didn't look freshly used. The pine needles weren't flattened the way they should have been. I found footprints, but they were faint, like they'd been there for days, not hours. His campfire was cold, no half-burnt coals. I assumed maybe he'd gotten up early and just decided to move on, though it struck me as odd he wouldn't say goodbye. I should have felt that first twinge of panic, but I told myself he must have had some reason. Maybe he didn't want to be slowed down by a dog, but something about that didn't sit right. Baxter and I resumed our hike. I occasionally called out for Nathan, but I was greeted only by the rustle of leaves and the distant caw of crows. As we advanced, my GPS started glitching. It showed us spinning in circles, like I was running around in a small loop. I checked my topo map. It didn't match the terrain. There should have been a ridge half a mile west, according to the contour lines. But no matter which way I looked, I saw only forest. My phone was already out of range, so I couldn't cross-check anything. Once or twice, I caught Baxter lifting his head again, tail going limp. It was as though we were being watched. Later that afternoon, I spotted something bright red caught on a bush. When I approached, I realized it was part of a torn backpack. Nathan's. His name was scrawled on the inside. The weird thing was that the pack looked old, the fabric frayed with age, and the supplies inside, protein bars, a first aid kit, and some clothes, were rotted, the wrappers half disintegrated. A thick swarm of flies buzzed around it. The protein bars had mold from another era. I retched from the smell. The pack's water bottle was cracked and yellowed, like it had been out in the elements for years. Yet, I had seen him wearing it just yesterday. The sun was beginning to sink, golden rays slanting through the pines, and I decided to find somewhere to camp fast. The temperature drops quickly in these woods at night. Eventually, I came across a half-buried fire ring. I pitched my tent, set stones for a small campfire, and tried to focus on something other than the bizarre condition of Nathan's pack. That night, everything grew worse. I managed to start a fire with kindling, but after a while, the flames turned a flickering blue, then slid into a murky green hue. I kept checking for chemical runoffs or weird moss, but the wood was just pine. Baxter barked at the fire, as if the flames themselves threatened him. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. I heard something in the distance, an animal call that sounded almost like Baxter's bark. Then, in a child's voice, so faint it could have been the wind, "I'm cold, let me in." I nearly dropped my mug of soup. I whipped around, scanning the darkness beyond the firelight. For an instant I thought I saw movement, but then it was gone. Somehow, I forced myself to go to bed. I held Baxter close. He whimpered, restless and anxious. Sleep was a mercy, and I didn't get much of it. Come morning, I saw that my sleeping bag was unzipped from the inside, wide open at my feet, like I had left it that way. But I didn't remember doing so. When I grabbed my cooler, I realized my food was liquefied, like it had melted overnight. Packages of jerky had turned black. My apples were pulpy, rancid lumps. My water jug smelled rotten. It took everything I had not to panic right then and there. This was not normal spoilage. Something was deeply wrong. Was I sick, hallucinating? But Baxter's whines told me he felt it too. I decided I was done with the route. I had more than enough reasons to call it quits. I was losing track of time, and the forest felt alien, like I'd stepped into another world. I followed my compass due east, aiming to find the main service road I'd come in on, or at least a ridgeline that would guide me out. I told myself I'd call the ranger station the moment I hit a signal. But no matter which way I turned, I couldn't find the road. The compass needle jerked in strange directions, spinning slightly. The terrain refused to match my map. My watch read 2:15 p.m., but within one glance away and back, it was suddenly 5:30 p.m. The sun shouldn't set that fast. I felt physically ill. I was scouring the ground for footprints that might guide me back to the trailhead when Baxter started barking wildly. I looked up to see a boy standing by a tree. He wore tattered shorts, no shirt or shoes, and his eyes were just wrong. It was like the sockets were hollow, and yet I felt that he saw me. He stood there, silent, in that too-still stance children sometimes have in horror movies, like a predator. I slowly raised my hands to show him I meant no harm. "Hey," I managed in a shaky voice. "Where are your parents?" He tilted his head. "You're not where you think you are." It took everything in me not to turn and run. Baxter growled at the boy, but the child showed no fear. He just stared, eyes impossibly dark. Then, in an instant, he was gone. I don't mean he ran away. I blinked, and he vanished from sight. My heart was pounding so loud I could barely think. I wanted to chase after him, to help if he was lost. But I also wanted to flee because something about him was impossibly wrong. In the end, I carefully approached the spot where he'd been standing. No footprints, no sign of a boy. It was like he was never there at all. Later, I nearly stumbled into someone else's campsite. At first, I thought it was empty. Then I realized I recognized the gear. That was Nathan's tent. The very same gear that had vanished from my campsite days ago, except it looked freshly used. And there was Nathan, hunched by a smoky campfire, staring at the flames. He was shirtless, the skin on his shoulders sunburned and peeling. But the strangest thing was his expression. He had this fixed grin, and he didn't blink when he looked at me. "You came back," he said, voice strangely flat. I felt chills race down my arms. "Nathan, what the hell is going on? Where did you go?" He just smiled, blinking too slowly. I inched closer. Noticing Baxter had halted behind me, hackles raised. "I never left," Nathan said. He reached for a canteen by his feet, took a gulp, then gagged like it hurt to swallow. "Been here the whole time." My stomach nodded. "I woke up and you were gone, and I found your pack. It looked ancient." "Don't worry about it," he said, his voice distant. "Doesn't matter anymore." I tried to keep my panic in check. "Look, I'm getting out of here. Everything's messed up, my GPS, my map. We can find the road if we work together." He kept smiling. "We are together," he said. I noticed that his eyes weren't focusing on me. They looked through me, or past me. And when he spoke, his voice seemed to echo, as if two tones were coming from his throat. I forced a nod, like I believed him, then told him I was going to make camp a safe distance away. The only reason I didn't bolt was because it was dusk, and I knew running into the darkness with no bearings might be worse. Also, I was worried about what might happen if I turned my back on him. So I pitched my tent about 30 yards off, glancing over to see if he'd protest. Nathan just stared at me the entire time. It made my stomach twist. Eventually, I crawled into my sleeping bag, Baxter at my side. It was maybe 3 hours later when I woke to Baxter's guttural snarling. I blinked, disoriented in the darkness, hearing rustling by the tent door. I grabbed my flashlight and fumbled for the zipper. In that second, the door wrenched open, and there was Nathan, or whatever wore his shape, crouched low, the pupils of his eyes unnaturally dilated. He was breathing rapidly, his mouth parted enough for me to see blood on his teeth. I screamed. Baxter lunged, snapping at Nathan's arm. Nathan lashed out, ignoring the dog's teeth as though he felt no pain. Blood dripped from his fingertips and the flashlight revealed his nails were peeled back, the undersides raw. "He showed me," Nathan murmured in that doubled voice. "He showed me how to see in the dark." I scrambled backward, my foot tangling in the sleeping bag. With a burst of adrenaline, I kicked him in the chest, and he stumbled. Baxter clamped down on his forearm, growling like I'd never heard. "Nathan, snap out of it," I shouted, but his eyes were glazed. He pinned me to the tent floor with startling strength, whispering over and over, "He's so cold, so cold." I fumbled for my multi-tool in the side pocket of my bag. Baxter's furious barking jolted me into motion. I stabbed the tool into Nathan's thigh. He howled in agony, falling off me. I crawled out of the tent, half dragging Baxter. The night around us was pitch black, the moonlight barely penetrating the thick canopy. I found the remains of Nathan's campfire, still smoldering faintly, throwing an eerie glow on the twisted trunk of a nearby tree. That's when I saw the boy again. He stood just beyond the flickering circle of light. His eyes seemed even darker, his face gaunt. I gasped in horror at the silent, blank expression on that child's face. He didn't move a muscle, except for a slight tilt of his head to watch me. Nathan limped toward him, cursing in a voice that was half his own, half something else. "Jamie," he hissed, "don't..." The boy turned and put a small hand on Nathan's chest. Nathan convulsed. I heard bones crack, or something like it. The firelight revealed deep scratches opening on Nathan's arms, invisible claws raking him. His mouth gaped in silent pain and blood trickled from his lips. Horrified, I could only watch. Baxter barked manically at the spectacle. Then Nathan crumpled to the ground. The boy's face was impassive. He whispered, "He tried to keep you, but you belong to me." Suddenly, the boy's head jerked in my direction. He stared. I realized my entire body was shaking, a primal terror unlike anything I've ever felt. I scooped up Baxter and bolted into the trees. I ran blindly, ignoring brambles that tore my ankles, ignoring the heaviness in my lungs. At some point, I found myself following the faint path of a creek bed by the pale moonlight. The forest was nearly silent. Not even crickets sang. I stumbled upon a cave opening, a narrow slot in the rock. I dragged myself and Baxter inside. The darkness swallowed us. My head spun, and exhaustion made me slump against the damp stone. I lit a small flashlight, revealing a cramped chamber no larger than a bedroom, the walls etched with some spiral designs. I saw old names carved into the stone. Daniel, 1962, Marjorie, 1987, Peter, 2012. Then, shock flooded me. I saw my name carved fresh and neat as though done moments before. Claire. I recoiled. Baxter pressed against me, trembling. The spiral patterns next to the name seemed to shift under the weak glow. I shut my eyes, trying to stifle a cry. Somehow, I must have dozed off, because I woke to a flicker of daylight shining down through a crack in the cave ceiling. My body ached as though I'd slept for weeks. My hair felt matted, my skin grimy. Baxter was curled at my feet, whimpering in his sleep. I unzipped the top of my pack, hoping to find some last scraps of food or water. Everything inside was spoiled, growing mold and black sludge. My water bottles were empty or cracked. My best guess was that I'd used them up, or they'd leaked in the night. But the mold was advanced, more like something you'd see after a month. The smell hit me, and my stomach churned. I retched, spitting bile. Desperate, I forced myself to the cave entrance. The morning light was cold, gray. I guessed it was early, maybe 6 or 7 a.m., but when I checked my watch, it read 4:38 p.m. The second hand was spinning backwards. My heart hammered. The date on the watch was a day ahead of what it should be. "No, that's impossible," I whispered. I left the cave, hoisting Baxter up with me. I spotted the creek again, hoping I could at least refill some water from a flowing source. He lapped thirstily at it. I purified a canteen using my emergency filter, then took a few gulps. Even filtered, it tasted strangely metallic, but it was better than nothing. As we started walking, I saw something that made me freeze. A figure trudged ahead of us, dressed in muddy, torn clothes. Nathan? But he looked half dead, his arms and face caked with blood. He was maybe 50 feet away, just standing with his back to me. Against every survival instinct, I found myself creeping closer. I had to see if he needed help, or if he was dangerous. Baxter let out a stifled bark. The man turned, revealing a face that was half torn open. The jaw was swollen, one eye missing, replaced by a dark pit. I gagged. He looked at me, tears cutting tracks through the grime on his cheek. "Claire, help me." The words gurgled out of him. His voice was no longer doubled, but painfully fragile. He raised a trembling hand, reaching for me. I took a step back, pressing a hand to my mouth. I can't," I whispered. He was beyond help. "Please." He took a single step forward. Then something yanked him back with inhuman force. His body jerked, and he vanished behind a stand of trees, leaving behind a swirl of bloody leaves. I stifled a scream, tears burning my eyes. I had to get out. I stumbled forward, muttering to Baxter, "We're leaving. We're finding the road, the station, anything." Every step I took, I felt more disoriented, like the forest was shifting. The sun overhead seemed to jump in position. Sometimes it was low on the horizon. Other times it was high. My watch changed hours erratically. 8 o'clock, 1 o'clock, 5 o'clock, all in the span of an hour. I had no sense of how long I walked. At times, I felt delirious. My legs were leaden, my lips chapped. Baxter's pace slowed. We found an old logging road at one point, but it led us around in a circle. I realized we'd passed the same boulder formation more than once, though I'd sworn we were heading in a straight line. That's when I glanced between the trees and saw myself. An older version, hair streaked with gray, face gaunt, eyes hollow. I, was staggering through the undergrowth, screaming silently, her mouth open. No sound came out. I could see her chest heaving, tears on her face. Then she vanished behind a tree trunk. I sank to my knees. I don't know how long I was there, but as the numbness wore off, I heard Baxter whining. That gave me the focus to keep moving. By now, the sun was setting again. Or maybe it was rising. I had no idea. The sky was turning a brilliant orange, then shifting to a sickly greenish hue. The wind died completely, making the forest air feel stale. We crested a small ridge. In a shallow ravine below, there was a flicker of orange light. A campfire? I approached quietly, dread nesting in my belly. I saw a ring of twisted stones set in the ground, the flames dancing bright. Next to it was that boy, Jamie. He stared into the fire, the light illuminating his pale face. He turned to me and gave a faint smile, though his eyes were as empty as ever. "You're already gone," he said softly. "This is just the last part." I opened my mouth, but no words came. I trembled, clutching Baxter. "I'm not leaving," I managed finally, though my voice shook. I won't let you have me." Jamie tilted his head. "It's not about letting me. You should have never come here, Claire. Time doesn't work the way you think it does." My pulse pounded. I remembered the carvings in the cave. I was just another name in that spiral. Another missing hiker lost to these woods. My face twisted in fury, or maybe blind desperation. I rummaged in my pack for anything flammable. My lighter was still there. I went to the boy, or the demon, or whatever he was, brandishing a small can of bug spray. He just watched, unimpressed. Baxter kept a wary distance, tail tucked. I struck the lighter. I didn't even know if the flame would burn the same abnormal colors as before, but it sputtered orange. I sprayed the bug spray through the flame, creating a short jet of fire. Jamie's face contorted in what might have been fear or anger. The trees around us roared with the sudden heat. The spiral stone ring collapsed in the confusion. Flames leapt from branch to branch, and I heard him shriek, a guttural, inhuman sound that reverberated inside my skull. The boy's figure shimmered like smoke, then withered. For a moment, he looked like a brittle, skeletal thing, not a child. Paper-thin skin crackled, limbs folding inward. A foul stench filled the air like rotting leaves and scorched meat. For a heartbeat, I thought I was free. Then, Jamie's voice, disembodied, echoed from all around. "He's in you now." Baxter barked crazily, spinning in circles. I grabbed his collar and stumbled away from the spreading flames. My lungs burned as I coughed on the smoke. Somehow, I found a faint footpath. Smoke poured through the trees behind me, crackling in the canopy. If the fire spread, that might lead the rangers here. Or maybe it was all illusions again. But I forced my trembling legs to keep going, chasing that thread of hope. At last, I emerged onto a narrow dirt road that looked more familiar, with deeper tire ruts. My heart soared. I recognized the path leading back to the highway. Had I done it? Just as night truly fell, I spotted a ranger station's metal roof, glinting in the pale moonlight. I stumbled up to the door and pounded on it. A woman in a faded uniform, hair tied in a ponytail, answered. She let out a gasp, ushered me inside. I collapsed onto a wooden bench, tears streaking my muddy cheeks, Baxter whining by my side. She asked me who I was, where I came from. Trailhead, I stammered, Forsh Mountain. I got lost. Someone stalked me. The ranger's face paled. That trail's been closed for a year. Disappearances? Didn't you see the barricade at the old turnoff? "I saw no barricade," I whispered. She just stared, clearly alarmed. She radioed for help, and soon an ambulance arrived. In the confusion, I realized Baxter was missing. I'd had his collar in my hand seconds ago, I was sure of it. But he was gone. When I asked the ranger if she'd seen my dog, she gave me a pained look. "I didn't see a dog," she replied quietly. They hustled me out into the ambulance. I remember them asking me questions about how long I'd been out there. Did I have any injuries? Was I dehydrated? My memory blurred, and I lost a chunk of time. I regained consciousness in a hospital bed in Mena, Arkansas. They said I was malnourished and in shock, had minor burns on my arms. The nurse told me I'd been found alone. No dog, no Nathan. I insisted on seeing my camera, which I'd kept in my pack. At first, the staff said they couldn't find a camera, but eventually, someone located it among my muddy belongings. I clicked through the pictures. The early shots were from my first day on the trail. Happy, normal. Then more pictures followed, ones I didn't remember taking. A photo of me asleep in my tent from outside, as though someone had unzipped the flap and snapped the shot. A photo of me kneeling by the rotted backpack, wide-eyed in horror. A photo of me with the boy standing behind me, his hollow eyes glaring into the lens. And the last one, me, older looking, with my hair streaked gray, wandering in the trees, face contorted in a silent wail. My eyes looked wrong, blacked out. I dropped the camera, trembling violently. When I asked about Nathan Ross, the sheriff insisted no man by that name was found in the forest. They had no missing persons report that matched the description. My statements were mostly written off as delusions from dehydration and possible hypothermia. They let me go after a few days. My sister drove all the way from Dallas to bring me home. She wanted me to get therapy, see someone about potential PTSD. I still hadn't mentioned the boy, Jamie, to anyone else. I wasn't sure I wanted them thinking I was insane. Life after that became surreal. Sometimes I'll see a flicker in a mirror and catch a glimpse of that older version of me, with a drawn face and hollow eyes. I'll look again, and it's gone. My footprints in the backyard sometimes appear to be barefoot, child-sized. I occasionally dream of Baxter. In the dreams, he's barking in the distance, as if calling me back. But whenever I try to find him, I end up in that twisting forest again, with rotted leaves and swirling shadows. The rangers launched a brief investigation into the fire I claimed to have started. They found a patch of burned land in the forest, but it was relatively small, apparently snuffed out by a storm soon after. They never found a boy's body or any sign of remains matching the name Nathan Ross. One day, a few weeks after I got back, I mustered the courage to look at the camera's memory card again. Most of the pictures were corrupted, but the final image was still there. Me, asleep in my tent, with that child behind me. He was looking straight at the camera. When I zoomed in, I could swear I saw his reflection in my open eyes, as though I was the one holding the camera. I've done my best to move on. Some nights, though, I hear faint scraping at my apartment door, like a dog's claws. Sometimes I'll glance down the hallway and swear I see the shape of a barefoot child, just for an instant. I've told myself it's all trauma, that I need therapy and time to heal, but I keep remembering his words, that final moment when the fire licked the sky and his voice echoed, "He's in you now." No matter how many times I remind myself it can't be true, sometimes I sense him inside my head, a cold presence, whispering. The world around me glitches for a second, like time is skipping, and I wonder if I ever truly escaped. That is my story. The reason I don't go hiking anymore. The reason I dream about hollow-eyed children and rotted supplies. The reason I still check my camera in terror. Because out there in Ouachita National Forest, I saw something that broke reality for me. Maybe I left a part of myself behind in those silent woods. Or maybe the thing that calls itself Jamie followed me out. If you ever see the turnoff to Forsh Mountain Trail and find a battered sign warning you away, heed it. Even if you don't see a barricade, it might be there. Or maybe time has eroded it. Don't push deeper. Don't let your curiosity lead you to a place that doesn't belong to us. Because if you do, you may find him. Barefoot, small, eyes like hollows, and he'll show you just how fragile your reality truly is. And once you see him, he may never let you go. That's all I have. I've tried to recount everything faithfully, from the rotting food to the day I stabbed Nathan in the leg to save myself. The rangers say they don't know what happened to me or to any other missing hikers out there. But sometimes, late at night, I'll hold my breath and listen for a dog's bark echoing on the wind. Or I'll watch the second hand on my clock do a slow, impossible circle in reverse. And I remember that day in October, and how a smiling man turned silent and something not quite human. How a boy with hollow eyes seemed to watch my every move. I remember how the forest itself felt alive, twisting time and place until I couldn't tell day from night or truth from terror. I wish I could say the story ends cleanly, that the nightmares have stopped, and I found Baxter living happily somewhere safe. But neither has happened, and I can't pretend otherwise. I suspect that if you stand in the right spot, at the right moment, you can still hear the echo of footsteps circling an empty tent, or the faint laughter of a child on the breeze, or see the swirling green-blue flames illuminating a figure that is no child at all. Or maybe that's just my nightmare. Maybe you'll never go there, never see what I saw. But if you do, remember what you've read here. Remember that once you step on that trail, it's like you never really left. And if you meet a young boy, ragged, barefoot, eyes like voids, pray that he doesn't learn your name. Because you might come back, if you're lucky, but you might come back wrong. I'm still trying to tell myself there's an end to this story, that there's a neat conclusion somewhere. But every time I say that, I catch a reflection in the window. My hair streaked gray for a split second, my eyes distant and haunted, like the forest is calling me back. So maybe there's no closure. Maybe it just goes on, playing tricks on me, dancing through time until one day it finally pulls me under for good. The only thing I know for certain is that I'll never again see autumn leaves fall without remembering that dreadful hush in Ouachita, the stench of rotted supplies, and the echoing laughter of someone who looks like a child, but certainly isn't. I can't stop you from going there, but I can warn you. And I guess that's all I can do. My name is Marla Ross. I was 32 years old when this happened to me in October of 2023. I'd been planning this trip for months, but to be honest, it had haunted me for a whole year. My younger sister Jessie died by suicide the previous autumn, and I couldn't shake the feeling that a piece of me died with her. I decided to hike deep into the Ouachita National Forest to scatter her ashes, figuring I'd find some sense of closure in the place we both loved. Before we get into it, I want to say up front, I'm no hero. I'm not ex-military, not some hardened outdoorswoman who can live off the land for weeks on end. I'm just a freelance illustrator from Little Rock who knows how to pitch a tent and read a map. But I thought it would be enough. The events that took place over 6 days, maybe more, I still can't be sure, proved how unprepared I really was. Jessie and I used to camp around the Ouachitas when we were kids, always choosing out-of-the-way hollows and ridges because we like the quiet. She was 4 years younger than me, more spontaneous, more daring. Even after I moved out, we stayed close. When she took her own life, guilt replaced every happy memory I had. In my worst moments, I felt that I should have seen it coming, should have been able to help. That guilt is what drove me to do something drastic. So, I packed up my gear, loaded my sister's urn into my old hiking backpack, and took her dog, Rook, a German Shepherd mix. Rook was hers first, but he'd been living with me since her passing. He was the only piece of Jessie I still had in this world besides memories. He was an older dog, about 9 years old, with some arthritis in his hips, but still loyal and protective. On a clear, crisp morning, I parked my car at a small, half-forgotten trailhead. I double-checked the basics: water, food, lighter fluid, matches, and the topographic map I'd meticulously marked. My phone read 8:07 a.m. The signal was spotty, but a quick text to my friend Jen in Little Rock got through. It was just a heading out now. I'll check back soon. If only I'd known how quickly that lifeline would vanish. I strapped on my backpack, leashed Rook, and started along a narrow path that was almost swallowed by the forest. Yellow leaves blanketed the ground, and the morning sun flashed through gaps in the canopy. The crisp air had that early autumn smell, a mix of damp earth and decaying leaves. I could almost imagine Jessie there telling me to look at some weird mushroom or big spider web. I kept hearing her voice in my head, replaying the same line, "Should have been you," over and over. So persistent that I'd sometimes spin around, expecting to see her behind me. The real reason I was out here, though, was to let her go, scattering her ashes in a hidden hollow we'd discovered as teenagers. I started feeling uneasy just a few miles in. There was something off in the atmosphere. I'm not talking about boogeymen or ghosts, at least not at first. It was the stillness. Even Rook got twitchy, ears perking at invisible noises. Occasionally, I'd hear branches rustling in the distance, but when I listened closely, the forest seemed dead silent. By midday, a sudden storm rolled in from nowhere. One minute, the sky was bright blue. The next, it was choked with iron clouds. Rain poured down in sheets, turning the trail into slick mud. Rook's paws got covered and my boots slipped a few times. So I found a flat area beneath a big oak to set up camp early and wait out the weather. I tried to phone Jen again, but my phone had zero signal. I fiddled with it, expecting at least an emergency bar, but all I got was a flickering battery icon. It drained from 73% to 2% in a matter of minutes. Then it died entirely. I figured water must have gotten in somehow, though I'd stowed it in a dry bag. I shrugged it off, set up my tiny single-person tent, and tossed Rook's dog mat beside it under a tarp. The map, at least, stayed dry, but after the storm passed, I noticed it looked a little waterlogged. The ink had smudged around the trails, making some markers illegible. I reassured myself that I knew the general direction, plus I had a backup GPS device, a little handheld unit I'd bought specifically for this trip. I dried my clothes, fed Rook, and tried to sleep. That night was the first time I heard the whispering. It was around midnight. The rain had stopped, and I was half awake, listening to the wind in the trees. Then I realized the wind wasn't blowing at all. The hush-hush of leaves wasn't random. It sounded like words just beyond comprehension. Rook let out a low growl, the kind he'd make when he sensed a stranger at the door. I unzipped the tent and aimed my flashlight into the darkness. Nothing but dripping branches, wet leaves, and the shining eyes of a raccoon scurrying away. My heart thumped harder than it should have. I chalked it up to my imagination and tried to ignore it, but Rook stayed alert, ears high, for hours. The morning came with a strange chill. When I woke, the tent door was wide open and my sleeping bag was lying unzipped to the side. I usually zip myself up tight because I get cold easily, so I figured I must have done it half asleep, but it was unzipped from the inside, as if someone had deliberately opened it. My heart fluttered at the thought. Then I noticed something else. Rook was gone. I grabbed my boots and my coat, stepping outside. "Rook?" I whistled, scanning the trail in both directions. After a moment, I heard a rustling off to the east. Rook trotted back, muzzle wet, no obvious sign of trouble. I let out a sigh of relief. He nuzzled my hand, but his eyes seemed distant. I told myself it was just the forest spooking both of us. I noticed my watch said it was 7:45 a.m., but the sky looked more like late afternoon. The sun was behind the clouds, sure, but the color of the light was off. An hour later, the brightness shifted, almost snapping from dusk to full daylight in a single blink. It was jarring, but I was too busy breaking down camp to dwell on it. I decided to push deeper into the forest. According to my smudged map, I had another 5 miles or so to reach the ridge above the hollow I was aiming for. I should have been able to do that in under 3 hours, but I got lost almost right away. The trail forks weren't where they were supposed to be. The topography didn't match the lines I remembered. Worse yet, my GPS handheld started glitching, claiming I was somewhere off a county road I knew was miles away. The compass bearings would spin, then freeze. It was midday when I reached a vantage point and recognized a particular rock formation. That gave me hope. I was closer than I'd realized. Feeling better, I decided to keep going. I still had enough food for a few days, plus the water filters. Rook seemed healthy enough, minus a slight limp in his back leg. I planned to treat that at camp later. By late afternoon, I found a small clearing. A ring of stones suggested a perfect spot for a fire. I tried to gather dry wood, but every piece felt oddly cold and damp, even though the storm had passed a full day ago. I used my lighter fluid and matches, but the flame guttered out twice. When it finally lit, it flickered blue at the edges, as though it were burning some chemical. I convinced myself it was just residue from the lighter fluid. Still, the sight gave me goosebumps. I fed Rook some kibble, and he ate reluctantly, as if the taste bothered him. For dinner, I had a can of chili. It tasted metallic, not at all how I remembered. Everything about the forest felt subtly wrong. Over the fire, I studied Jessie's urn. It was silver, with engraved vines along the side. I traced the patterns with my thumb, recalling how she loved to draw floral designs on her notebooks. A lump rose in my throat, a twist of grief and guilt so potent it nearly made me retch. That night, I barely slept. Around midnight again, I heard voices, not just whispers, but actual conversation. My ears pricked, and I held my breath to make out the words. It sounded like someone repeating my name. Marla, Marla? I unzipped the tent, scanning the clearing with my flashlight. Nothing. Just darkness and trees. Rook, curled up near me, was trembling. I reached out to comfort him, and he stared at me with wide, frightened eyes. When I woke the next morning, I felt an intense chill again. My sleeping bag lay about a foot away, unzipped. My watch read 6:12 a.m., but the clearing was lit up like 10 a.m. The worst part was my food supply. I opened a sealed bag of trail mix only to recoil at the rancid smell. A moldy fuzz covered the nuts and chocolate bits. My water tasted stale, with a faint tang of rot. This had been sealed gear, brand new, stuff I'd bought at an outdoor store. Now, it was all spoiling for no discernible reason. I also discovered half of my backpack's contents scattered around the clearing. My sweatshirt was drenched in some dark fluid that smelled like stagnant pond water. I had no idea how it got there. Topping it off, the urn containing Jessie's ashes was missing. Panic surged in my chest. I tore the area apart, combing through leaves, looking behind every tree and bush. Rook followed, sniffing, but his sense of smell seemed dulled. Finally, I stumbled upon the urn resting on a rock formation about 30 yards from camp. The top was unscrewed, but it appeared the ashes were still inside. I felt tears of relief and confusion. Why would someone, or something, take it only to set it on a rock? There were no tracks in the mud, human or animal, other than my own. Did I sleepwalk? I tried to recall if I'd gotten up in the night. My memory felt fuzzy, as though I'd lost chunks of time. By this point, I was on edge. I wanted to get out, but the call to finish what I'd come for, and not to mention the near impossibility of backtracking without a functioning GPS or phone, kept me pressing forward. If I could just reach that hollow, scatter Jesse's ashes, maybe something would let me go. Maybe it was guilt, or the forest itself, or my imagination. But I had to see it through. The day wore on, and the trails seemed to shift, so I hiked mostly